4 months later, Cat Bane opened the briefcase, his eyes wandering over 20 rows of shiny credit stacks. Everything seems to be in order, he said calmly and closed it again, handing it off to his henchman. The other half you will get when the mission is over. The Sith confirmed the terms of their contract. Even if the mission fails, Bane reminded him. Which it probably will. You don't just go and attack the GD temple and expect everything to go smoothly. We are not here to conquer the place, Darth Maul all but growled, or even to destroy it. We are here to send a message. A message to the people of Coruscant and the Republic that we are powerful and determined enough to strike right at their heart if need be. We are here to plant fear into their minds, and to show them how vulnerable even the strongest of them are. Well, with as much firepower as you've brought, we can certainly do that, the bounty hunter muttered, eyeing Savage and the giant cannon on his back with derision. He didn't have anything against a couple of good explosions, but he preferred the sneaky way, the carefully laid out plans against the Zabrak storm in and kill everybody method. Well, at least he got paid well for it. Despite their heavy armor, the 3 Zabraks were quite capable of blending in with the shadows. Bane had a hard time looking at their faces, he even forgot that they were there at times. That was quite a feat. They must be projecting a powerful mind trick to evade even his notice. Bane led the Sith though the streets of Coruscant's underworld undiscovered. They eventually met his man on the inside. Bribing him had cost him almost a fourth of the money he'd earned with this job, a nervous cook working at the temple. He gave them the information about the ventilation and sewage system. One of the Zabraks, the one with half a dozen blasters strapped to his belt, was good with technical stuff, and disabled the energy shield for them. 10 minutes later they were in the temple, right over the archives. Well then, let's get the party started, Savage muttered, pressing both palms on the ground. Bane quickly grabbed his wrist to halt him, eliciting an angry growl and an uncomfortable pressure around his neck. If you blast through it now, every GD in the whole dang town will be here within seconds. Which includes only up to 10 masters, Maul answered with a hiss. Probably less since some will be busy evacuating the younglings. This place is ridiculously understaffed. You don't have to fight with us, Firo noted. Your job is to get us out of here when we have what we came for, nothing else. So stay put and shut up. Bane shook his head at their stupidity as Savage force pushed through the ground, sending the brothers down into the room beneath in a mass of debris and dust. Red flashed as the shrieking librarian was beheaded. Curses flew round, and 3 more GD fell in the first wave of attacks the Zabraks brought down on them. Still having his mission in mind, Bane grabbed a GD that had been shot through the stomach, and was now bleeding out, kicked his lightsaber out of his hand, and dragged him to the back of the archive. The Sith were making an awful lot of noise. More GD must have come through the doors, keeping them busy. Bane pressed the barely conscious GD against the scanner, thus opening the doors to the underground archive. The place where the GD kept their holocrons, the databases for all their holy knowledge. Suddenly Bane felt a hot breath in his neck. He whirled around to see Darth Maul staring at him with those creepy yellow eyes of his. We barricaded the door. That'll be 5 minutes. Get to work. He didn't have to be told twice. Soon the 2 men had secured more than 20 holocrons, worth quadrillions of credits, and Maul started destroying one after another. The geometrical objects shook in his palms, suffering from the pressure of the force he was putting on them, until their power source died and they broke apart. Bane was almost unable to watch. In that moment a sudden noise drew their attention. The GD had broken through the barrier. Maul muttered a curse. At the others, he commanded and left to help his brothers. Bane stayed back and continued to sweep the place. He had a detailed description of which holocrons to take with him, and which ones to destroy. The noise behind him grew louder. He was pretty sure clonotroopers had joined the mess as the blaster fire had tripled. Finally Bane was finished. He ignited several small fires that would eat through the wooden cupboards and left the archive. Once he saw him, Savage gestured to him, and Bane threw him the bag with the remaining holocrons. The Zabrak checked the contents, then drew that ridiculous big cannon on his back, and pointed it at a wall. The entrance was blocked with debris and dead bodies, clonotroopers seeking refuge behind it as they continued to fire. There were still 4 GD in the room fighting against the Sith, determined to keep up with them. An ear-shattering explosion sounded as the entire wall of the temple was blasted away. Savage didn't hesitate to run into the next room and fire again, getting rid of another wall and revealing a way out of the temple. Bane activated his comlink, giving the code to his crew, and the 4 men rushed to the new hole, all the while warding off for dodging blaster fire. Just then a ship lowered to the ground and a number of ropes offered them a way up. Cat Bane was the first on the ship, followed by Firo, who promptly made his way to the other side to check for reinforcements. The GD caught up with the other 2, and they had to engage them in duels. There were more robed figures than Bane had expected. The Padawans must have joined their masters. Suddenly Maul cried out, stumbling back from his opponents. "Brother!" Savage called out, momentarily distracted. Maul was clutching his hand, which was not there. Bane had to brace himself quickly as Savage threw the bag with the holocrons to him. The idiot was probably prepared to stay with his injured comrade. Bane didn't get the chance to catch the bag though. One of the GD raised his hand, and the bag changed its course, just like that, ending up in his hands instead. Maul had caught himself again. "It's alright," he muttered, showing off raw wires coming out of his arm stump. The hand that had been severed had been mechanical. We have to go, now. But the holocrons, Savage said, making a move to go after the GD who caught the bag and was now running. Leave it, we don't have time. Maul answered angrily. Bane thank God or the Force or whoever was listening to guys like him as the two idiots finally climbed up the ropes. He had been this close to leaving them on their own. Get me off this dang planet, he ordered his crew. He could barely believe that they had made it even this far. It was a shame they lost those holocrons, though. Miraculously, the ship did make it out of the atmosphere in one piece. Bane had to give it to him, that feral guy was a really good pilot, and the extra weapons that Vader had added to the ship were hot. Several hours later they arrived in the system Vader's fleet was currently staying in. They docked onto the Executor and Bane and the Zabraks were lead straight to the Sith Lord. The three brothers fell to their knees in one practiced motion and bowed to their master. Bane stood at the doorway a bit awkwardly. He didn't let his pride ruin a good deal, but he didn't bow when it wasn't asked of him either. He was only here for his money after all. His job had been to get the Zabraks in and out, no more. That the rest of the mission hadn't gone as planned wasn't his problem. I trust you have good news for me, Vader said, his imposing tall figure staring down at them with a dark frown. My master, Darth Maul, leader of the attack on the temple, rose his head. We carried out the mission as you commanded. Most of the holocrons were destroyed, and the GD temple is in flames. Many GD died from our hand, and there have been no losses on our side. However, he hesitated for just a second. We were unable to retrieve the holocrons you asked for. Cat Bane wasn't force sensitive by a long shot, but even he could feel the sudden spike in wrongness around the Sith as he glared down at his apprentice. You have failed to carry out my orders. Where are the holocrons now? My lord, the GD still have them, he admitted. The bounty hunter was kinda impressed that he didn't even flinch as Vader's face contorted into a mask of fury. The destruction of the temple and the other holocrons was only secondary. You dare to show your face after disappointing me this much? Vader raised a hand, and though he stood a good 10 meters away from him, the Zabrak suddenly rose into the air, hands clawing at his throat and eyes bulging, as his air was cut off by an invisible force. Bane lowered his head, allowing his enormous hat to cover his eyes. He didn't think Vader was very fair. The mission had been beyond difficult, he would have thought it impossible, suicide even, and it had taken him weeks to decide to take the job, even though the pay was royal. I should kill you for the shame you brought onto yourself, Vader practically hissed, and the other two brothers began shifting nervously as Maul began to turn blue. Finally Savage stood up. Master, please, it was my fault. I let the GD get away with the holocrons. Is that so? Vader said, oddly calm but clearly annoyed at being interrupted. He dropped Maul to the ground, who laid there gasping, unable to move. In that case, you shall take his place, the Sith Lord declared. You may have very well cost us the victory in this war. There is only one punishment for that, no? Maul cried out, having realized what he was meaning. Master, please, I can do better. I'll sneak back into the temple, they won't expect it. Shut up, Maul. You knew beforehand what the price for failure was. He turned to the youngest Zabrak, who was still kneeling, trembling. I give you the choice, though. Savage may die a horrible painful death at my hands, or one of you can release his soul. Maul threw a withering glare at Feral as he hesitated, seemingly thinking about it. Don't you dare. He shouted, fighting to get to his feet again. It's alright, Savage muttered. It was my fault. He looked straight at Maul. I'm sorry, brother. Feral rose and drew his blaster. No? Maul shouted and drew his weapon as well, the red blade flickering to life. Bane reacted at once, raising his own blaster, set on stun and hit Darth Maul as his back was turned. The Sith cried out one last time before he slumped to the ground, lightsaber rolling out of his hands. Feral flinched again, looking from Bane to Vader to Savage with uncertainty. Well? Vader asked coldly. What are you waiting for? Savage turned to face his younger brother with a defeated look. Nothing will happen to my brothers, right? Feral might even rise in my ranks, Vader offered calmly. Nothing will happen to him, not so sure about Maul anymore, though. He glared down at the stunned body. The silence stretched. My patience isn't endless, Vader said at last and raised his hand. Savage blanched as he felt his windpipe constrict again. No? Feral cried out. Then there the noise of a blaster being fired. Savage's body was ripped from the invisible hold, and a moment later he fell to the ground lifelessly. Feral stood with his hands grabbing the blaster, trembling, staring wide-eyed at his brother. The darkness retreated, seemingly drawing back under Vader's skin as he stepped forward, lightly placing a hand on Feral's shoulder. You have done well, he muttered, then turned away. Get rid of this mess, he ordered to a few droids standing at the sidelines, and get this imbecile out of my sight, he added, gesturing towards Maul. Then at last his gaze settled on Bane. You come with me, bounty hunter. Bane gave a curt nod, not even sparing a glance at the two downed Sith. Vader's foul mood seemed to have passed, giving him hope that he would receive the full sum after all. He did bring back all three brothers alive. If Vader chose to have them kill each other afterwards, that wasn't his problem. Cat Bane closed the door behind him, watching Darth Vader with mild apprehension. The man had just let one of his generals kill the other for no apparent reason. The mission had been a success after all, even if the Zabraks didn't know it. Bane had no desire to get between the fronts of these men. He didn't care that apparently Vader was searching for an excuse to get rid of his most loyal servants. It wasn't his problem. I trust you have better news than my apprentice, Vader said threateningly once they were alone. As I have already reported, I have what you desired here, he said calmly. 10 minutes before their ship had docked onto the Executor, Bane had called Vader as per their agreement and briefed him of the mission ahead of time. Vader had told him that the Zabraks would be punished, and that he should stun Maul if he made any problems. Now Bane reached into his back, revealing a small pyramid-shaped object. Vader had described this holocron to him in detail when he'd given him the mission, down to the place in the archive where he could find it. The attack on the temple, the destruction of the holocrons and thievery of the others, all of it was a distraction. While Savage had claimed the GD's attention with the bag, the one holocron Vader was really interested in had been saved by Cat Bane without the knowledge of the brothers. The money first, Bane insisted when Vader made a move for the object. The Sith Lord merely sneered, and the holocron floated into his outstretched hand, ignoring Bane's attempts to get it back. "Your money is here," Vader said and made a gesture, letting another heavy briefcase float over to him. "With this, the transaction is over." Bane quickly checked the contents of the briefcase, his eyes glowing at so much gold. "Congratulations on your acquisition," he said with a smile, suddenly a lot more polite now that he had his money. "I look forward to doing business with you again in the future." "Certainly," Vader said dismissively, his gaze locked in the holocron hovering over his palm. He didn't seem the least bit bothered by the death of his general. Bane shrugged and made his way out. He wouldn't try to understand these Sith. It couldn't be healthy for his mind. Count Dooku got down on one knee and bowed his head, carefully shielding his mind. "I give you my greetings, Master," he said calmly. "It has been a long time." Darth Sidious regarded him coldly from under his hood, with the disinterest of a man who knows he is more powerful. "Too long a time, maybe. I can feel that you have lost faith in our plan." Dooku stood up in a slow, deliberate movement. Lost faith. That was the understatement of the year. It had been 8 months since he had last talked with this man over the holonet. Even then the conversations had been short, only an exchange of commands and reports. That Sidious was now here in person could only mean one thing. He was tired of the charade they were keeping up, and had decided to dispose of Dooku. As if he had read his thoughts, Sidious suddenly raised his hands, and before Dooku could even think about defending himself, a powerful wave of lighting sprung from his fingertips and connected with the Count's torso. The Sith apprentice let out a single cry of pain before sinking back to his knees. He was in agony. The lighting coursed through his veins, ripping his flesh, his bones, his mind. He was sure he would die. After a couple of minutes though, Dooku was left shivering and cramped at the floor, unable to stand up again. "I have allowed you to continue on your traitorous path until now, my apprentice," Sidious growled. "It served to my advantage and advanced my plan. I don't hold your desire to kill me against you. It is the way of the Sith. But you don't want to kill me to take my place. You know you are too weak for that. Instead you have allied yourself with the false Sith, Darth Vader. You have exchanged one master for another, and that is where your true foolishness begins." Dooku gasped, barely hearing anything as he reached for his lightsaber. Cruelly, Sidious stepped onto his hand, breaking his bones and taking the saber hilt for himself. They were in one of the meeting rooms in a separatist base. As soon as Dooku had received the call of his master to prepare for his visit, he had sent a message to Lord Vader, but he doubted the man could make it in time, as Sidious truly wanted to kill him. The Sith Lord stepped away from him though, and flipped a switch that turned on the holo receiver. "This message was posted on all separatist military channels 2 days ago," he said as the recorded scene played out. "I dare say you know it. After all, you were the one who spread it." Ah, that was what this was all about. Dooku watched as a translucent Vader forced his apprentices to attack each other after a failed mission. One of them was knocked out trying to attack Vader, one fell to the ground with a smoking hole in the middle of his forehead, and one stood at the sidelines, blaster still raised, eyes wide and terrified. Vader had ordered him to spread the recording to all military bases, to let it be known what happened to subordinates who failed him, to fill their hearts with terror, and ensure their loyalty. Dooku had been against it. He had no idea how, but Vader had built himself somewhat of a reputation amongst his underlings. He was feared, yes, but also respected, and this display was unnecessarily cruel. Not to mention that Savage, although he was a brute, had been very loyal to their cause and a useful fighter. His death had not only cost them a good general when they were so close to winning, it might also have cost them the loyalty of the other two brothers. Vader had not even offered any explanation for his actions. There probably wasn't even one. It wouldn't be the first time he killed a subordinate in a fit of anger. "Your new master is a lost cause," Sidious sneered in derision. "His sanity is evaporating with each passing day. He would destroy everything he built up if the mood strikes him. He would have no qualms disposing of you as well. That is the man you follow. What do you want?" Dooku ground out, trying to get his trembling under control. Sidious wouldn't bother lecturing him if he wanted to kill him. "I will give you one last chance to do the right thing to come back to me. Vader is getting out of control. Even you have to see that. I have no use for him anymore. Now that he has turned against the people supposed to protect him, he is weakened. Kill him now and you shall keep your power over the separate systems once I am Emperor. The offer was tempting. Dooku had long since noticed Vader's sanity slipping. He had grown to be the most feared man in the galaxy to the point where entire planets simply gave up as soon as they saw his flagship in the orbit. But as time passed, it had less to do with his power and ruthlessness, and more with his unpredictability. Sometimes he would abandon a battle and retract his whole fleet to chase after some random GD. He would support a temporary truce on this planet in one moment, and execute a member of the Separatist Council for suggesting the same on another. Until now, at least Dooku had seen a common goal in his dealings, that was his son. Now though, Vader was turning on his own generals, and that, as far as he could see, didn't have anything to do with the young GD Knight. Skywalker hadn't even been at the temple when it had been attacked. So yes, Dooku did see the point. Vader was getting out of control, and the Count had to start making plans for when the war ended. He had meant to work with him to kill Sidious, as he was the bigger threat, but now he wasn't so sure anymore that was the case. The Separatists were really close to defeating the Republic now. This wouldn't have been possible without Vader. What if the false Sith was the bigger threat here? Dooku wouldn't be able to get rid of him on his own. He needed help. There wasn't really a choice. Not when Dooku was already so weakened, unable to fight the lightning-wielding Sith Lord in front of him. I will accept your orders, he gasped after only a slight hesitation. Darth Vader will die. I will not disappoint you, my master. Darth Sidious stepped back, finally releasing him from the pressure of the Force. This is your last chance, my apprentice. Fail me and there won't be a next time. What about it was so hard to breed, the other generals? I have no use for them. Kill them all, only General Grievous you may keep, he can take over for Vader. Dooku felt like laughing all of a sudden. Grievous taking over Vader's position. Shivering, weak-minded, cowardly Grievous. The difference between those two couldn't be greater. Then suddenly the full meaning of Sidious' words hit him. I shall kill all of the generals. Even Ventress. He had grown somewhat fond of the girl. She filled the hole left by Qui-Gon's death. Until now Dooku hadn't noticed it, but it seemed even he had adapted to Vader's politics, and allowed himself to form bonds where none were appropriate. He had raised Ventress to be a ruthless assassin, but she wasn't just an apprentice, she was like a daughter to him. Even Ventress, Sidious confirmed coldly. Except of course, you think you need your loyal puppet to plot against me? Of course not, he muttered, head lowered. I will do as you say. It was a suicide mission, he realized. Maybe he could kill Vader when he got him by surprise. Maybe he could hunt down Maul and Fyril separately before they got wind of it if he wasn't injured too badly. Ventress, he might not even have to kill himself, simply lure her into an ambush of the enemy. If he only had to do one of these things he might succeed, but it was highly unlikely he could do all four. Sidious simply wanted him out of his way. At the same time, Dooku didn't feel comfortable anymore with the original plan to conquer the Republic and kill Sidious only afterward either anymore. He suspected Vader might want to get rid of him when that time came anyway. Thus he would have to kill him beforehand, and the only way he could see that working was by bringing up his own generals against him. Something that shouldn't be too hard after what he did to Savage. The Zabraks had been well taught, and with them and Ventress on his side, Dooku might be able to stand a chance against Sidious after all. Count Dooku couldn't be completely sure whether or not his mental shields had been powerful enough to keep the thought hidden from his master, but if they hadn't, Sidious didn't mention it. He accepted his servitude, spoke one last warning and left. It seemed he would wait with his next move until after Vader was dead. The metallic double doors were practically ripped from their hinges, as Darth Vader stormed into the base with Fyril at his side. Count Dooku's call for help hadn't come unexpected, and yet he feared he might have arrived too late. It was 2 months ago that Chancellor Palpatine had been granted special rights due to the dire situation with the war, giving him complete control over the law and the means to change it, including laws of the basis of the Republic. He could declare himself Emperor any day now. The only thing he still needed was a loyal apprentice. While Sidious had been busy manipulating the political climate to suit his needs, he hadn't been entirely passive on other fronts either. Sidious had planned to let Anakin kill Vader, but the two had formed somewhat of a truce after their birthday party, and the few times they had met each other on the battlefield, it was little more than friendly sparring between them. Sidious had planned to have Kenobi assassinated on one of his negotiation missions on Vader's territory. After the first serious attempt though, Vader had ordered all such meetings to take place on the Executor, where he had handpicked his living crew, and all the droids were automatically controlled by the Mother. Sidious's latest scheme included ruining the reputation of Anakin's Padawan. For this though, Vader was prepared. The last time around, a disillusioned GD Padawan had caused some trouble and a few deaths in the temple using micro-robotic technology. The incident had been blamed on Ahsoka, who had run off to prove her innocence, and nobody believed her. On Palpatine's urging, the GD Council had expelled her from the Order. The real culprit was caught before she could be sentenced by the Senate, but Ahsoka had refused to return to the Order, having lost her trust in them. This episode had a strong part in Vader's willingness to betray the Order. The Zabraks' attack on the temple, while useless from a military point of view at this time, had weakened the Order enough to trigger the attack of the rogue GD under Vader's conditions. The explosion had taken place just this morning, and the Sith knew Sidious would jump at the chance just as he did last time. Even if Ahsoka left and the incident drove Anakin further into his arms, it was no longer guaranteed that Anakin would be able to kill all the leaders of the Separatists, as Vader had been ordered to. He needed Dooku, Vader and his generals out of the way, and thus it was logical to attack now. Vader strode into the hall where he could feel Dooku's by now familiar presence. The Count was sitting on a throne-like chair, looking down at him with his usual noble air, though there was still something tense in his expression. Sidious was nowhere to be seen, but Vader still had the feeling he had been here. There was something sick and twisted in the aura of his former master that he would recognize anywhere, and it left traces wherever he went. "I see you are still in good health," he said, not able to keep the suspicion completely out of his voice. "Is there something I should worry about?" "Oh yes," Dooku answered, slowly standing up and making his way over to him. "There is plenty." Suddenly the old man drew his lightsaber. Vader, having foreseen this, quickly blocked the strike with his own weapon. Fyril jumped immediately, 2 blasters in his hands, and started shooting at Dooku's feet, forcing him to dance around Vader, as the Sith Lord let out a whirlwind of strikes and slashes. There was no need for words. Vader didn't care why Dooku had suddenly decided to betray him. Well, he had worked with him for the last couple of years in something of a companionable agreement. They weren't friends by a long shoot. This was only partly due to Vader's bad memories about the loss of his first limb. It was just that Dooku, as a nobleman, seemed to live in an entirely different world than Vader, as a former slave. Vader thought him an arrogant, narcissistic jerk. Dooku thought Vader a hot-tempered, impulsive lunatic. There really was little love between them, but Vader had been willing to endure him the way he was willing to endure boring, pathetic and corrupt politicians, simply because it wasn't very practical to kill them all off. Vader allowed Dooku to push him back temporarily, testing how serious he was about it. The Count thanked him by nearly taking his head off. Vader made a somersault over the offending blade and slid back a few meters. This gave his student an open path, and he was about to shoot him when Dooku halted his movement, forcing his fingers away from the triggers. "This is your chance, Fyril," he hissed at him, his eyes burning into the younger one's. "It is your chance to avenge your brother. Together we can kill Vader." Darth Vader couldn't help a small chuckle. "Do you honestly think that?" he asked, rather amused. Fyril was staring with wide eyes at Dooku. Then his gaze flickered over to Vader momentarily. "I don't think I have any use for you anymore. It seems you've got the rabies." The Sith Lord tilted his head to the side. "If you hope for Fyril's help in your attempt to murder me, you must be really desperate." "Sidious wasn't too happy with you, was he?" Dooku gnashed his teeth, threw one last look at the Zabrak, who didn't seem very eager to help either of them, and charged again. This time Vader didn't hold back. He held out a hand, his palm pointed at Dooku, and without any visible effort, he shoved the other Sith across the hole. Dooku met the metal with a sickening crunch, his body falling to the ground. The movement was only minimally slowed down by the Force. Vader stepped forward, calling Dooku's lightsaber into his hand. But the Count was not finished yet. With a hateful glare he reached out for Vader, and suddenly blue lighting sprung from his fingertips. Vader reflexively raised his lightsaber and caught the dancing lighting with it, and kept it from hurting him. Dooku threw another last desperate glare at the youngest Zabrak, but Fyril merely stared back at him. Suddenly fast steps could be heard from the end of the hall. Dooku ended his attack, unable to find any more energy in him, and when the light blinded him no longer, he could see the person entering behind Vader. "Master," the Zabrak said, "I found the guards, they're all dead, and there's nobody left at the hangar bay." He stopped short when he realized what he had interrupted. Just now Vader had raised his arm again, lifting off Dooku without touching him and leaving him suspended in the air. How is that possible? The Count still managed to get out as Vader was not yet pressing on his windpipe too much. "You're dead." Savage merely looked from Dooku to Vader, confused. "Master, our dear friend here," Vader said sulkily, "as he was not in on our little act, thought he could use your apparent death to bring up your brothers against me." "An act?" Dooku echoed hollowly. "You were just playing around again." He winced when Vader pressed a little harder, narrowing his eyes. "Playing around? Hardly. It took me weeks of preparation to perfect this ploy." "To what end?" Dooku demanded furiously. "To bring up half of the army against you. To ruin your own reputation and damage the image of the Separatists." "It was necessary," Vader replied, uncaring. "How else was I supposed to get Maul to betray me?" Dooku stiffened even further. "He doesn't know." His gaze flickered over to Savage. "Oh, we told him, alright, after we had enough material for the vid." His reaction had to be convincing after all. "Then we just had to alter the images a bit to make it look like Savage actually died when he was really only stunned. Both him and Fyril were in on the whole plan from the beginning, of course. And what have you gone through that much trouble for? Maul is now a fugitive. News will soon spread that he escaped after a failed assassination to avenge his brother. He has no money, no connections, and no reason to live anymore. He'll mix with the lower people, with spies and bounty hunters, and thus he will be in the perfect position for his special undercover mission." Dooku tried to compose himself as best as he could while still hanging in the air and said, "If that is the case, it seems I have misjudged you. Well, I wish you had confided your plans in me. My reaction to it was unwarranted. Please forgive my transgression, Lord Vader. Vader merely stared at him coldly. It is too late to beg for your life. You have wasted the chance I gave you. This is the last time you raised your hand against me. No, wait. But Vader didn't wait. He merely closed his hand to a fist, and Dooku started choking for real, desperately gasping for air. His skin bruised and turned blue round his neck where an invisible grip was choking him. In one last desperate attempt, Dooku sent another wave of lighting at his enemy. His attack managed to connect. It wasn't very strong though, and Vader didn't stop choking him, even as the pain coursed through him. This was nothing compared to the sessions with his former master, when his flesh had been raw and vulnerable, with thousands of wires helping along the lighting by conducting the current. Finally Dooku stopped fighting, losing his consciousness. Vader immediately lost interest in him, and with one last snap he broke his neck. The Count fell to the ground, dead. Darth Vader turned around, meeting his two students with a dark look. Spread the word to the Separatist Council. I am now the only one they will deal with at the top. Feral and Savage bowed their heads simultaneously. Yes, Master. And tell Maul to make his way to Coruscant. There's a nice bounty on the head of our favorite Jedi Padawan. Ahsoka woke up feeling like her head was being split in two. She opened her eyes just a bit but saw nothing but darkness. She could feel though. She was lying on her stomach on the hard ground, her hands bound on her back with the smooth but icy feeling that she had grown to connect with energy ropes. There was a constant rattle around, and the ground was vibrating. She must be in some kind of vehicle. Suppressing a groan so as not to alert her captor to her awakened state, the Padawan tried to remember what had happened. She remembered being ordered to do an investigation on an explosion in the Jedi temple, together with her master. People were tense because it was possible, though not likely, that a Jedi was behind the attack. They had found the person responsible, but while Leto was the one smuggling the bombs into the hangar, she wasn't the one who made them. Ahsoka had visited her in prison where the woman told her it had been a Jedi who gave her the technology. Before she could tell her name she had suddenly collapsed, choked to death by invisible hands. The following days were a blur in Ahsoka's memory. She knew that it looked bad for her. She didn't know who had helped her to escape after being arrested for Leta's murder, but whoever it was certainly hadn't done her a favor. She was following a trail of corpses, and by the time she escaped into Coruscant's underground, she'd been so tangled in a web of lies and deception that she wasn't sure she'd ever be able to free herself from the overwhelming amount of proof against her. She tried telling them that she was innocent. Her friend Barriss seemed to be the only one aside from her master who still believed in her innocence, but if things went on like that, she wouldn't even be mad at them if they changed their minds after all. Still, none of it explained why she was now lying on her stomach with her hands bound behind her. Of course the Jedi and all of the clones were after her, but she had kind of thought, maybe even hoped, that if one of them would find her, it would be her master. Anakin wouldn't treat her like this though. The mystery was abruptly solved when she heard a low voice speak behind her. I know you are awake, little Jedi. There is no need to pretend otherwise. Dang. She had thought her day couldn't become worse, but it seems she was wrong yet again. She knew that voice. Ahsoka wriggled a bit, eventually managing to roll around and sit up. The room was too dark to make out any details, but she was able to make out two eerily glowing yellow eyes on the other side of the very small room. Her captor patiently waited until her eyes had gotten used to the darkness. Darth Maul was sitting in front of her, seemingly relaxed aside from the arms he'd crossed in front of his chest, and the chin he'd stuck out defiantly. He melted into the shadows easily with his black robe, the hood pulled into his face to hide his crown of white horns, and the blood-red skin that was almost swallowed by his black markings. What are you doing here? Ahsoka growled, fighting in vain against her chains. You've been a naughty girl. There's a nice price on your head that I'm going to claim, he told her. The Padawan snorted. Don't be ridiculous. Your bounty has to be 10 times as high as mine. They kill you immediately. Maul merely tilted his head. His gaze seemed to penetrate her as if he was searching for something in her, but couldn't find it. The Republic doesn't like employing droids, he said at last. It will be easy to convince them not to look too closely at the one bringing them their little runaway. It's still risky. She insisted, fearlessly staring back at him. You can be sure your mind trick will work on them, and even if it does, I'll tell them about you, and then they'll know you're on Coruscant. Maybe you're right, the Sith relented. The bounty is only half as much if I only bring your head, but it would probably still take me a long way. He stood rather abruptly, igniting a red lightsaber. No? She shouted, struggling anew. Dang it, she couldn't see an exit anywhere, not even in the light of the red saber. She was pretty sure by now that she was in a wagon of some kind of underground train, probably on her way back to the temple or the prison. That's ridiculous. Since when do you care about money anyway? Something she couldn't quite identify flashed in Maul's eyes. It was gone quickly, but whatever it had been, it had managed to make him stop. I don't, he answered flatly. I just need something to start with. Ahsoka stopped her fruitless fight against the rope and stared up at him with a scowl. You left your master, didn't you? She suddenly realized. Maul took a step back so that shadow once again obscured his face. I heard about what he did to your brother, she continued. I always knew that he was crazy, and you can be dang sure I'm ticked for what you guys did to the temple. But that was low, even for him. You have no idea what you're talking about, the Zabrak whispered hoarsely. He betrayed you, the Padawan continued, and now you want to get back at him. I understand that. No, you don't, Maul answered harshly. Ahsoka hesitated. Okay, maybe I don't, she admitted. I didn't think that you'd care. But it doesn't make any sense that Vader would send you here to hunt me down. I'm nobody important. So you must be acting on your own, and that means you're not working for him anymore. You think I'm hiding from him, Maul sneered. You think I'm afraid he'll kill me too in his delusion, that I can't stand being near him, but I'm too much of a coward to revenge my brother myself. Ahsoka raised an eyebrow at him. Are you? Maul was suddenly very close, one hand stemmed against the wall behind her, the other pressing the hilt of the deactivated lightsaber against her chest, right where her heart was. If he ever laid a hand on one of my brothers, I would choke him to death with his own intestines. He hissed furiously. Ahsoka's heart beat somewhere in her throat. She questioned her own judgment at having enraged the Sith like that. Time to take a few steps back. Alright, she said somewhat breathlessly. I believe you. Maul glared at her hatefully for another couple of seconds, but to her surprise, he did pull back after that. There are so many things you don't see yet, he spoke calmly, but with the underlying tenseness still present. For one, you are not unimportant. I don't know what kind of role you're supposed to play, but you're not one of the countless replaceable pawns in this game. Geez, thanks. Is it your way of telling me it's nothing personal that you're going to deliver me to the court that wants to execute me? They won't execute you, Maul said dismissively. Ahsoka felt a suddenly lump in her throat. She was unable to look at him for a moment before she found the courage to open her mouth again. Yes, they will. I'm not as stupid or blind as you think. I did my homework, you know. What do you mean? He asked her sharply. I remember what you told me that one time during the negotiation. I did some research myself, and I have to admit that the Republic isn't nearly as good and innocent as I used to believe. That bombing at the temple, it wasn't me, but I know it must be a GD. I have no idea what's driving him or her, but it's not the first time something like that happened. I heard it from people before. They said they're crazy or just traitors, but they said they had visions from the Force that showed the downfall of the Republic. Ahsoka shuddered as she remembered those people. There had been that general who deliberately raised his death count in battle, and even manipulated armies of clones to fight against each other, to get the attention of whichever evil was lurking in the background and join it. She remembered that little girl from a group of younglings that had been kidnapped by the Sith, who had screamed and fought against Ahsoka when she tried to take her to her ship, screaming she didn't want to go to the temple because they were all going to die, and she just wanted to go home to her mama. She remembered that sweet boy, the separatist who wasn't anything like the monster she usually fought for, and who was still convinced the Sith was doing the right thing in fighting the corruption of the Republic. Finally, she remembered a conversation she'd had with her master after she carried her doubts to him. Instead of assuring him that she was paranoid, he told her that he had noticed as well that there was something wrong with their government, but that as of now, it was still the best alternative they had, and that they'd just have to work hard to make it better. But there were people who didn't share his optimism, people who thought the Republic was beyond help, and who'd rather see it crumble and build up something new. I'm not blind, Ahsoka repeated, taking a deep breath. There's corruption in the Republic too. There's corruption in the GD Order and probably even in the Senate itself. I don't know why I was set up like this, but I know that the people responsible are powerful. Probably powerful enough to arrange my execution. So if she had to fight against that dang lump in her throat again, she was not afraid. If you're not one of the people who brought me into this situation, then you're playing right into the hands of the guys who you claim to fight against for the last 4 years if you take me there. Maul stared at her wordlessly for a couple of seconds. At last he turned away with a scowl, ignoring her as he stared in space, seemingly deep in thought. Just say something, Ahsoka eventually let out. She would not plead, no matter what, but his silence was really going on her nerves. Maul opened his mouth but then closed it again before making a new attempt. My brother is not dead. That had not been what she'd expected to hear. At all. What? Maul looked at her and there seemed to be a fight going on within him. Savage is fine, he clarified. The vid that was sent to the base is it's fake. Well, most of it. At that time, I really did think that my master had lost it, and I was terribly angry at Feral for what I thought he did. But when I woke up again, Savage was there, completely unharmed. But then Ahsoka didn't know what to say. She thought Maul had been dropped as well, had thought maybe she could make him come to see her way, but if he was still on Vader's side, then she was dead. I was given a mission by my master. He wanted me to travel to Coruscant and find you because there was a bounty on your head. That were his exact words. No more, no less. As long as I succeeded with the mission, he promised he'd never force my brothers and me to go against each other. Implied, of course, was the threat that if I failed, the scene of the vid might become true after all. Maul retreated into the shadows once again and sat down, leaning against the wall. At first, I couldn't believe it. I had done everything for him. I had always been loyal. Why was he doing that to me? I thought we had an understanding. I actually thought I might be more to him than an apprentice. But then I realized that I am. He does care and he does trust me enough so that he gives me a crazy mission and expects me to know what he really wants to be the result. The original Sith dogma demands that the apprentice kills the master, thus proving his superiority. Darth Vader has set himself the goal to build a new order though, one that is built upon bonds. He does not see love and compassion and friendship as a weakness to be eradicated, but as a tool like any other, that he can ruthlessly use to get more power. The dark side can make people do terrible things to each other. I've hurt my brothers more times than I can count, but Vader taught us that it is possible to still retain our bond even when submerged in darkness. I believe that this mission is my trial of fire. My master has essentially set me free. He gave me the means to abandon him, maybe even to destroy him if I convinced my brothers to join me. But just passing up this chance is not enough for him to accept me as an equal. I have to figure out what he wants me to do here, to understand what's truly going on in his mind, and only then would he stop threatening my brothers, as it would no longer be necessary to ensure my loyalty. I want him to trust me. But I just don't get what he wants from me. Ahsoka was silent for a moment, contemplating how she could use this for herself. It was pretty disturbing how tangled Maul was in the other Sith's web, and she couldn't help but feel a spark of pity for him. But right now she had to think about herself. She needed more information. So that's why you didn't kill me, she thought aloud. You don't think your master really wants you to turn me over? At first I thought it might be that easy. I'm pretty sure my master wants his son to join our ranks, and if the GD of the Republic's court executed you, that might be enough to push him over the edge. Especially if it's done unjustly. Now you're saying that you've begun to doubt the Republic yourself. Maybe it isn't about Skywalker after all. Maybe it's about you. Ahsoka stiffened immediately. I'm not joining the dark side, she hissed. Are you sure about that? Serving the dark does not have to include cutting yourself off from all your bonds and emotions. It does not make you a monster. The GD have turned away from you, you don't owe them anything anymore, so what are you so afraid of? If you come with me, you will be safe. Just because I have already been convicted of committing a crime doesn't mean that now I actually have to commit it. No, but it does mean nobody would think any worse of you if you did, Maul answered slyly. It also means they couldn't punish you for a second time. If you ever wanted to abandon the GD order, now would be the perfect time to do it, as there would be no repercussions. Ahsoka didn't know what to say to that. She had already admitted to having doubts, but just because she didn't agree with her order on a few points, didn't mean she joined their enemies. I can still prove my innocence, she insisted. My master believes in me. I can't turn away now, I can't do that to him. Even if you do manage to prove that you're not responsible, would you still return to them? That was the real question, wasn't it? Ahsoka turned away, disgusted with herself when the answer that should be so clear to her didn't come immediately. I don't know, she admitted at last. Maul stared at her for another couple of moments. Finally he ignited his lightsaber, and Ahsoka felt her heart beat faster. That's good enough for me, Maul decided, and with a swish she cut through the ropes on her back. Ahsoka stared at him incredulously. I'm going to help you to prove your innocence, Maul declared, sheathing his weapon. Because you think that's what your master wants you to do? She said with a light snort, rubbing her sore wrists. Because I think that's the right thing to do, the Sith corrected her unexpectedly. How do you know I won't turn you over once this is over? Because, he said with an amused smirk, you're a GD. You might snarl and scratch at me like an angry kitten, but in the end, you're a good person. You are no danger to me. The Padawan gaped at his arrogance, not knowing exactly if she should be flattered or offended. She settled for the latter. I am not. You are not what? A GD or a good person. A kitten. Oh, that. Yes, you are. A very angry, very cute kitten. Maul smirked at her again before opening the door of the train. It was driving really fast, but using the force they should have no problem jumping out of it and vanishing in the shadows of the tunnel. Come on kitten, Maul teased her with a grin. Show me that you have the potential to be a lioness. Then he jumped and Ahsoka cursed him at his stupid grin as she followed him out of the train. She would show that idiot, alright. She would show it to the whole world. Anakin leaned down to the body and examined it carefully. There seemed to be a strange roaring beast in his chest trying to break free, but he couldn't quite identify the violent emotion. Was it anger? Fear? Betrayal? She's dead, Anakin, Obi-Wan whispered. I can see that, he replied coldly. It was hard not noticing the burning hole in her chest or the dead eyes staring up at him, white and scared. His master stepped closer to him, but Anakin merely turned away. He wished he could be alone. All the clones bustling around him, sealing the crime scene, he wanted them all gone. Yet he knew there would only come more. More clones, more investigators, more terror tourists. It wasn't every day a GD got murdered after all. It's not your fault, Obi-Wan tried again to get through to him. It's not Ahsoka's either. He called out furiously. Anakin, no. I refuse to believe that she did this. But he also knew that the proof was overwhelming. There were witnesses who had seen Ahsoka standing over the bodies of her clone guards when she fled her prison. There was camera footage showing her and the Sith apprentice Darth Maul in the streets of Coruscant. And now there was Barris, a young GD Padawan, Ahsoka's friend who was believed to have come to question her, and who was now lying here, with a deadly lightsaber wound, in the midst of a storage hall full of the same micro-robots that were used to bomb the temple. The camera had caught Maul and Ahsoka entering shortly before Barris did. There was no way Ahsoka was going to get out of this on her own. Killing a bunch of clones was one thing. Anakin might have been able to pull some strings, call in a few favors, she would have still been imprisoned for life, but it would have given them more time to find the real culprit. Now though, with the death of a GD, the Senate was going to demand her execution. She was no longer protected by the Council, having been officially expelled this morning. They were going to shoot her on sight, and even if she did turn herself in, she wouldn't get out of it alive. But Ahsoka was innocent, he knew she had to be. Maul might have forced her to come with him. Anakin was certain that if one of them had killed Barris, it was the Sith. He had probably set up the whole thing and was now holding his Padawan hostage. But nobody in the council wanted to listen to Anakin. Their security service had information indicating Maul was no longer working for Vader, and even if he did, what motive would a high-profile assassin like him have to target a random Padawan and spin such an elaborate tale around her? They were convinced she was with him willingly and nothing Anakin had said had shown effect. Abruptly Anakin turned around and went to leave the storage hall with long strides. A plan was forming in his head. Even though Ahsoka was innocent, she was under a lot of pressure now. She needed to know that Anakin believed in her and would do everything to help her. Anakin, where are you going? Obi-Wan asked. My Padawan run off with a Sith and is leaving a trail of dead bodies in her wake, he growled darkly. Where do you think I'm going? I'm going to a bar to get smashed, that's where. Anakin. Obi-Wan clamped down a hand on his shoulder, forcing him to stop. I know that this is hard on you, but you can't do anything rash. Define rash. You know what I mean. Anakin turned around slowly, fire burning in his eyes. Do you believe it was her? He asked finally. Do you believe she betrayed us? The GD hesitated. I don't know. No, listen. I don't think she planned for any of this to happen, but it did. There's nothing you can do about it anymore. Please don't let her drag you down with her. I can't abandon her, Anakin whispered. I just can't, she's my Padawan. If it were me, wouldn't you do the same? There was a terribly guilty look crossing over Obi-Wan's face. You know I would. But you also know I wouldn't be supposed to, and so, neither are you. Please, Anakin. You have to be stronger than me. Anakin hesitated for just a second. He knew he was hurting his master. It was never easy for Obi-Wan to admit that Anakin was more to him than just a former student, that he was like a brother, like family. Even though Anakin was happy about it and saw it as something good, Obi-Wan was still incredibly bothered that he was allowing himself a bond that the GD Order would disapprove of if they knew. He wasn't strong enough to push Anakin away, but he knew that his master secretly wished Anakin would turn away from him, even if it would hurt. Anakin knew in that moment that if he asked his master to help him with this, he would. He also knew that Obi-Wan would never forgive himself for it. He was already keeping so many secrets from the council, covering up so many of Anakin's transgressions. If he forced him to take part in this now, Obi-Wan wouldn't be able to hold it in much longer. Then he would be the one doing something stupidly rash like going to the council and pretending it had all been his idea. Anakin couldn't let that happen. The young knight's shoulders slumped a bit. You're right, master. I'm sorry, I am too close. I shouldn't even be here. Obi-Wan relaxed visibly. It's alright. Let's just get back to the temple. I can handle the report. No, Anakin looked around, making sure nobody was listening in on him. I think I'll just go home. Obi-Wan understood the hint that he was going to see Pad. His face hardened a bit, but he nodded, silently promising to cover for his absence. But Anakin didn't go home. He grabbed R2 from the ship he'd arrived in with the clones, hopped into his speeder, and vanished in the busy traffic of the planet-wide city moments after. R2-D2 beat questioningly at him. I know that's not the way to the temple, he muttered. We're making a quick stop beforehand. Anakin went lower and the streets became darker and dirtier. The GD shed his outer robe, paying a beggar for a ragged jacket with a hood that he pulled deep onto his face. Half an hour later he arrived at his destination. It was a dirty bar in a run-down building like any other in this street. Anakin told R2 to wait in the speeder and went through the back door. He found his contact in a game of cards with half a dozen other shady figures. Kadak was a Duro, a blue-skinned, dread-eyed individual with a more than shady past. Anakin had met him during an investigation around the bounty hunter Cat Bane, who was from the same species, and had helped the Zabrak brothers to attack the temple. He hadn't been very cooperative. In the end Anakin had agreed to drop the matter if Kadak did him an unofficial service. Shocked by such an offer coming from a noble GD, Kadak had agreed. The Duro recognized him when Anakin allowed him to get a glimpse on the lightsaber hanging at his belt, ended his game, and lead him to adjacent empty room. I have what you asked for, GD, he said. I can have the package here in 1 hour, or I can just tell you where to pick it up. There's a change of plans, Anakin said. The identity has to be changed to fit a Tagrita girl, 16 years old. He pulled a photo of Ahsoka out of his pocket and gave it to Kadak. Oh? Does that mean you only need 1 seat as well? Anakin hesitated. No, he said at last. You may keep the second reservation but pick a different ship. One where less questions are asked, and have them drop her off at a large, anonymous spaceport. Preferably neutral. Anakin met the duo's stare unflinchingly. He knew what that sounded like, but he also knew Kadak wouldn't care. All he cared about was, that will cost you extra. Exactly. I'll triple your wage if you can get me the documents today. And of course, I will still need the identities you prepared previously. I could set you up to be a family. Would make crossing the border easier. No, we won't be traveling together. Whatever you want, GD. I'll have the documents ready. He passed him a slip of paper with an address where to pick up the goods. Anakin took it and left. 15 minutes later, Anakin stopped at an abandoned house, once again having made sure nobody followed him. Once inside, the GD turned to his little droid friend. Alright R2, he said, I want you to contact Vader now. R2 bleeped indignantly. Don't even try it, he interrupted him. Does he really think I wouldn't notice he messed with your programming? I know you can contact him, so just do it. R2 went silent for a moment. Then his dome-shaped head began to spin, lights flickered on and out on his control panel, and finally he spewed out a ray of light that widened to form a holographic image of Darth Vader, just barely a foot tall. Anakin, Vader greeted him, and the GD had to sit down to make out the surprised look on his face. I can't say I expected your call, but it's always nice to hear of you. Shut up, Anakin growled. I had half a mind to never speak to you again after what you did to the temple. I know, and I'm sorry, but it was necessary. A few weeks ago, I really thought you had changed. But as always, it was just a lie, wasn't it? You never intended to end the war. Actually, his father corrected him calmly, the attack on the temple had nothing to do with the war. I would have never went so far if it weren't for our conversation. Anakin felt cold. What do you mean? The Jedi had something that I wanted. The original plan was to conquer the Republic and then just walk in and get it myself. Now that that's not going to happen, I had to improvise. Vader raised an eyebrow. But that isn't why you called me, is it? Anakin had to rein in himself. As much as he wanted to question his father, this wasn't the time for it. Ahsoka was expelled from the Order. They say she attacked the temple and killed a fellow Padawan. Now she's on the run with one of your apprentices, and I want to know what you have to do with it. Ah yes, the temple bombing. I admit that I knew of it beforehand, but no, he said immediately when he saw Anakin's angry expression, that wasn't my work. I already got what I wanted the week before, remember? I had a vision about this though. The culprit you're searching for is Barriss. She's the one who attacked the temple, as she's one of the very few intelligent beings who recognized where the council was leading the GD to. She must have blamed it on your Padawan. Barriss is dead, Anakin stated flatly. Killed in the same way the clones were. Really? Father, what are you not telling me? I have to know. Well, in the vision I had some time ago, Ahsoka worked together with the Sag Ventress to prove her innocence. Ventress was around because Dooku tried to kill her as she became too powerful for his tastes. She was after Ahsoka's bounty so she would have some funds hiding from her former master. However, I prevented that vision from coming true by killing Dooku before he could make an attempt on his apprentice's life. Wait, you killed Count Dooku? Anakin called out in shock. Indeed I did. The news has not reached you yet, I take it. Why would you do that? Vader chuckled a bit. Why are you so shocked? You're the one who told me to scare the leaders of the Separatists a bit, weren't you? Dooku would have never agreed to the peace, he couldn't afford to. Therefore, I killed him. He also tried to assassinate me, but I don't know many people who haven't, so it wouldn't be too far-fetched to say I acted on your orders, son. Anakin didn't know what to say to that. How did that prevent Ventress from leaving? You killed her master after all. It's not like she knows that. She thinks he was murdered by Sidious. Oh, right. That mysterious other Sith who has supposedly infiltrated the Senate. The same, Vader confirmed, ignoring his sarcasm. He paid Dooku a visit to turn him against me. Successfully, as is obvious. Anyway, knowing without Ventress's help your Padawan would be in trouble, I was so kind as to send my own apprentice to help her. That was after the bombing and her escape. I'm sure if you bother to trace his actions back, you will find that he didn't arrive on Coruscant until after she was expelled. If Barriss is dead, I can only conclude that she attacked them and paid the price for it. I'm still waiting for Maul's report though, I could share it with you if you'd like. Anakin was slowly beginning to hate how cooperative his father was. It was like they had always worked together, which they hadn't because he was not a dang traitor. No thanks, he ground out, just tell me how I can find them. You do not plan to murder my apprentice, do you, son? As much as I'd like that, no. I won't attack unless he's been hurting Ahsoka. I do not believe he has. Maul actually likes your little snips. That's why I sent him on this mission. I can tell him to meet you wherever you'd like. Anakin chose to ignore the comment that sent shivers down his spine at the insinuation, and told Vader where they should meet him in the evening. Then he told R2 to erase the conversation from his memory, and made his way to the address where Kadak had promised to leave the documents for him. XXX. Maul roughly pulled the girl behind the corner and pressed her against the wall. What are you do? Ahsoka tried to shout indignantly, but the Zabrak quickly covered her mouth with his hand, not paying attention to her struggling. He peeked around the corner, which was just surrounded by a patrol of clone-troopers. Ahsoka got very quiet in his sort of embrace, her eyes wide as she took in the soldiers. Maul didn't attract too much attention with his thick cloak and hood, not in this part of Coruscant. His body effectively covered hers, and even if it didn't, the Padawan could feel the crackling energy of a force field around them, a widespread mind trick making people overlook them. Her master had told her that some Sith were capable of that. He could even do it himself, but no matter how hard she tried, she hadn't been able to learn it. Not that there had ever been much need, a good disguise did the trick in most cases. Still, right now she was thankful for the field. The patrol passed and Maul let go of her slowly. I would really appreciate it if you didn't shout every time I touch you, kitten, the Sith noted dryly. Ahsoka just glared at him but decided not to remark, since he had effectively saved them from being caught. We have to get off this planet, she said instead. Maybe we could sneak on board a ship. She didn't fancy the thought of staying around the Sith any longer than necessary, but his powers could make traveling unnoticed so much easier. Oh? What happened to I have to prove my innocence? Maul returned with just a hint of a smile. Well, you effectively busted that plan when you killed my best friend. Oh, please, he scoffed. Last time I checked, best friends don't try to stab you in the back. Really? I'm surprised you learned that in the Sith Academy. Her voice was cold and biting, but underneath it, there lay a tangled mess of hurt, anguish and insecurity. She fought together with Barriss. She connected with her on a level that she hadn't with anyone other than her master. She thought she could trust her, and she'd been so relieved when Barriss told her she didn't think she was responsible for the attack, and even agreed to helping her in secret. Ahsoka had received a call shortly after Maul and her had left the train. The other Padawan had led them to the warehouse that was full of micro-robots. Then suddenly they had been attacked by a masked assailant. At first Ahsoka had thought that she had finally found the one responsible, and so she and Maul had fought together against the rogue GD. She and Maul had never really agreed on what to do if they found the culprit. To Ahsoka, that hadn't appeared to be necessary. Of course they had to capture him or her alive, in order to bring the person to the court and clear Ahsoka's name. But then, Maul had thrust his lightsaber right through the chest of the attacker. A person who, upon removing the mask, turned out to be none other than Barriss herself. It was clear now that the girl had been behind the attack all along, and she had been in the process of relieving Ahsoka of her head. That's why, objectively, she knew Maul had saved her life. But he was a Sith, and Barriss had been her friend. It was so hard to accept that she had betrayed her, and it was so easy to blame it all on the Zabrak. I will never be able to prove my innocence now, she muttered bitterly. The only proof I had is dead, and they'll probably blame that on me too. If I want to avoid execution, I have to get away from here. I know that, Maul replied irritably. I just thought you might, I don't know, say goodbye before you leave the system. You don't seem like such a terrible person. I can't imagine the only one on this planet who doesn't believe you're guilty is the one who set you up in the first place. She looked at him a bit strangely. Hey, thank you. I mean, I know you GD get brainwashed into believing that having friends is a bad thing, but you're the one Padawan lucky enough to get a somewhat respectable master who isn't completely bonkers, so I thought not all hope might be lost for you. You just had to ruin it, didn't you? Ahsoka sighed. I would like to say goodbye to my master and to assure him that I had nothing to do with this. But if I contact him and he lets me go, he's going to be in trouble himself. I can't risk that. In that moment there was a small noise coming from Maul's wrist. There was a sort of metallic bracelet that seemed to display a message which Maul read with a scowl. New orders from your master? Ahsoka asked, trying to not let her discomfort show. Are you going to kill me after all? To her surprise, Maul showed her the message, which only consisted of an address. I told you my mission isn't as clear-cut as that. I'll have to go to this location and I'd prefer it if you came with me, but if you want to try your luck finding a ship yourself, I won't stop you. Ahsoka contemplated that offer for a full 3 minutes. Her wanted poster was probably on display at every spaceport at this point. It was possible, if unlikely, that it was known Maul accompanied her. If so, getting away unnoticed would be even harder. Whatever happened, his master would probably bust Maul out of this. As she stayed with him, her chances were good that she would survive, but she would also most likely end up in the hands of the Separatists. She would be out of the frying pan and into the fire. Maul probably wanted to make her join the Sith, and she was determined not to do that. However, she believed him that his orders left him a lot of leeway, and she might convince him to let her go with an I'll think about it. She just had to time it so she would leave before he got in contact with Vader again. Fine, I'll come with you, she told him at last. But once we're off the planet, it's everyone for himself. Of course, kitten, he replied with a smirk. Stop calling me that. Ahsoka returned furiously. Oh, I will, he assured her. As soon as you stop being so adorably angry. Oh, she wanted to punch him so very badly. Unfortunately, that would only prove his point. Ahsoka didn't know what irritated her more, the kitten endearment that sounded so wrong from the mouth of a monster like him, or the angry part that was a subtle reminder of the GD, saying anger leads to the dark side, and thus was his way of reminding her that they weren't so different after all. The two Force users, a Sith and a not quite GD anymore, made their way to the address, but they weren't greeted by a droid or another Sith, or even just one of Vader's henchmen. The only one present was Master. Ahsoka called out, staring at Anakin Skywalker with thinly veiled shock. What are you doing here? Anakin looked tired. There were dark circles under his eyes, and a tension surrounding him that made Ahsoka involuntarily take a step back. As soon as the GD saw them, he scowled deeply, which made him look even more frightening. That was not even noting the lightsaber in his hand. For a moment Ahsoka's heart sank. She wondered if maybe her master had intercepted the message and came to hunt her down. She wondered if Barriss's death had changed his opinion about her after all. But then she noted how Maul had slipped into a similarly defensive stance next to her, and she realized that her master's suspicious glare was not directed at her. Are you alright, Ahsoka? Anakin asked without letting Maul out of his sight. I'm fine, but Master, I didn't kill any of these people. I was just trying to prove my innocence. Anakin looked at her for just a second and grimaced. Well, you shouldn't have thrown your lot in with the Sith then. She didn't know what to say. Maul was just trying to help, but she could never say that. It would sound stupid. She wasn't even sure herself what his ulterior motive was, though she had come to consider believing his story. Her master had often complained about his father's madness. This sort of game would suit him. Barriss was the one who framed me, she tried to explain further. She set me up. Yes, and she's also conveniently dead. Ahsoka wanted to protest, but her master merely shook his head. I do believe you, Ahsoka, but I can also see why nobody else will. I wanted to help you to clear your name, but you've made that impossible. She would not cry. She would absolutely not. What am I supposed to do now? The former Padawan whispered. Still not letting the Sith out of his sight, who taken a few steps back but didn't make any hostile movements, Anakin came closer and gave her a small package. These are some money and the documents necessary to get you off the planet. You have to hide somewhere safe for a couple of weeks at the least, probably longer. If you need to contact me, do it through Padme Amidala. You can trust her. Ahsoka opened the package, revealing fake passports, certificates, and tickets for a ride to a neutral planet in the Middle Rim. How were you able to prepare these this fast? A shadow flickered over her master's eyes that were dark enough as it was. I do not expect to stay much longer here myself. The mistake that the Council made in rejecting you is only the last one in a long line of failures that will eventually lead to our downfall. Ahsoka grabbed his arm, looking into his eyes intently. Master, you can't leave the Order. You're the sole person in there who understands what's going on. If you leave, they'll crash in a matter of weeks. Anakin's face remained passive. I don't have much of a choice in the matter. But I made a deal with Vader. She stared at him in shock. What? He wants to end the war if I leave the Order. I don't know yet if I can trust him though. He was the one who told me where to find you. If it continues like this, the moment I don't have the GD's protection anymore, I might be declared a traitor. He threw a glance at Darth Maul and continued. I know Vader will offer you a place at his side as soon as you leave the planet to further lure me to him. I won't. No, Anakin interrupted her, gripping her shoulders tightly. Don't reject it because of me. He will know if you do and use it against you. You have to strengthen your resolve and make your own decisions. He let go of her, and Ahsoka felt as if the gaze from his blue eyes were searching through her very soul. You've become a strong and independent woman, Ahsoka. I'm proud of you. Ahsoka let out a sob and then, before she could stop herself, she hugged her master tightly. Don't ever forget about me, Master, she begged. Of course not. You'll always be my Padawan, he said, patting her back a bit awkwardly. Eventually she released him and stepped back. Anakin turned to the Sith who had watched the exchange passively. I don't know what kind of role you play in Vader's plans, he said with a low voice, but know that I will hunt you down and kill you in the most gruesome way possible, if you dare to hurt Ahsoka. The Zabrak raised an eyebrow at his light tone. I'll make sure to remember that, Maul replied, trying very hard not to let his amusement show. Anakin shot him a glare but didn't stop them when Maul took Ahsoka's hand and dragged the reluctant girl with him. She still turned and threw one last glance at her master. She wanted to remember everything about him. After all, this may very well be the last time she ever saw him. Vader was on the bridge, watching as two droids cleaned up the remains of an officer stupid enough to question his latest plot, when the red holo image of the mother appeared next to him. I see, it's a wonderful morning for you, sir, she greeted him unusually polite. Contrary to what people believe, I do not actually enjoy having to choke my followers, he corrected her, as it usually implies they have done something to prove their incompetence, and I will have to clean up the resulting mess. The mother was silent for a couple of seconds, which was strange. For her to come to him like this outside of an official meeting, it usually meant they had visitors. If anything was wrong with the ship or there was an emergency, she would have called him over the loudspeaker. What is it? Vader finally asked when it appeared she wouldn't speak without prompting. I need to talk to you about something, the AI blurted out, arms crossed in front of her chest defensively. Very well, he answered, expecting her to give a status report. It could be about Maul, who should have left Coruscant by now with Ahsoka. Or maybe she'd finish the report on the Sith Council's reaction to Dooku's death. I mean, now, she clarified, throwing a meaningful look at the rest of the crew, who'd been busy pretending to be busy, ever since Vader had choked their superior. Wordlessly the Sith activated his earpiece, so whatever information she had would remain private. But the mother shook her head. I mean, not here. She gave him another look, then flickered out of existence. Vader scowled, now worried, and made his way to his private quarters. The mother was already waiting for him, and she had adopted a stance and expression that her system listed as nervous. While the AI, sentient as she was, could be impulsive, she always had full control over which emotion she wanted to wear. It made Vader wonder why she felt it necessary. He knew that she was at unease. The mother was too proud to adopt this look even when her body, the executor, was in danger. At the most she would get angry and power up her turbo lasers. In fact, the last time he had seen her like this was at his birthday party, when he had to assure her that yes, he did indeed like her present. What is it that you want to talk to me about? Vader asked. She hesitated yet again, following the protocol of her nervous program. I want another name, she said at last, stubbornly raising her chin. Vader stared at her. Excuse me. You heard me, the AI huffed, stemming her hands to her hips. I want another name. What's wrong with Executor? Absolutely nothing. But it's not my name. It's the name of the ship. You're the ship, Vader reminded her, trying to get her point. No, I mean yes, but I'm the AI of this ship. I'm the soul of this ship, but ever since we developed that virus that turns the droid's loyalty, I have implemented myself in every ship of the main fleet, and in every commander's ship of the subunits. Heck, I'm even present in a few Republican ships, those that managed to escape the battle. I'm so much more than merely one ship now, and I think I deserve my own name. Vader felt a headache coming. And the mother isn't enough. No, she sniffed. It's too general, and to be frank, it's a bit embarrassing too. I have ships and I have a crew, but, well, I don't really have children. That's why I don't believe the name fits me. Don't you think it might be too much trouble to change your name? Everyone would have to get used to calling you something else, and the nickname would probably still remain. The mother didn't seem to like that at all. She switched from the nervous to the angry protocol, and Vader found a fiery gaze directed at him, while slowly oxygen was being sucked out of the room, making it hard to breathe. After a good decade of fighting for these morons, providing them with food, shelter, and work, after risking my reactor in countless battles without ever complaining, I do think it's hardly too much to ask if I'm paid a shred of respect. Don't you agree, Master? Vader thought it might not be worth it to mention that the mother very much enjoyed going to battle, certainly more so than her human crew. He was a bit short on air too, one hand tightly gripping onto a chair next to him to keep his balance. Fine. I see your point, you can have another name, he allowed, intent on ending the angry protocol. It was a success, as the AI immediately switched to happy mode. Oxygen returned to the room as she grinned and gave him a slightly electrifying hug. Thank you so much, Master. She let go of him again with an expectant look. Well, what is my new name going to be? I don't know, Termination. Dominant. I'll have to think about it. Her face fell a bit. But I want a real name. Those are real names. For a ship or a pet, but not for. Darth Vader raised an eyebrow. For human. She lowered her gaze meekly. Well, soon enough she raised her head again, meeting his eyes. I want a human name. Well, if it's that important to you, I believe it would be best if you chose your name on your own, he said carefully. And you might be right. You did name your kid Anakin Jr. Actually, that was his mother. He had named his kid Luke. Then again, one could argue if that was really proof of his name-giving ability. XXX. Ahsoka Tano stepped out of the shower and reached for a towel. Silently she wondered why she was still here. Together with the tickets, her master had included reservations for a room in a small hotel at their destination. Maul and her had agreed to not look a gift horse in its mouth, but it did lead to a few unsettling questions. Such as why there was only one big bed. The preparations her master had made had originally been for himself, that much she understood. But who he planned on traveling with? Probably with the senator that she was to call to contact him. But, one bed. Ahsoka was only dressed in her underwear under the bathrobe, as she didn't have any sleeping clothes with her when she stepped into the bedroom, only to discover that Maul was already lying under the covers, his chest and arms showing off lean muscles adorned with swirling black tattoos. What do you think you are doing? She snapped at him when Maul let his gaze wander over her figure unabashed. Enjoying the view, he returned with a smirk. You don't plan to get in bed with that thick robe, do you, kitten? Don't call me that. I don't plan to get in bed at all with you still in it, she exclaimed. You can take the couch. Now why would I do that? The bed is big enough for 2 people. Ahsoka felt her face go red. Just because. The lady always gets to bed, it's a matter of decency. Maul sighed and raised himself in a sitting position, which caused the blanket to slip from his floor. It was revealed that he was apparently used to sleeping in the nude. Obviously trying very hard not to grin when Ahsoka's face turned an unhealthy shade of red, Maul regarded her seriously and asked, "Do I look particularly decent to you?" The ex-GD gaped at him, somehow unable to draw her gaze away from his muscular chest and nether regions. She had never seen a naked man before. A young humanoid man who was handsome, as she loathed to admit it, Maul was. She was not completely ignorant. She had seen pictures. It was impossible not to, living on Coruscant, and she had seen her master naked when she had been younger, which was bound to happen when they practically lived together in a tent, using the same sanitary equipment. But Anakin didn't really count, and she hadn't really been interested back then in anything. She wasn't now either. Of course, that was just stupid. And maybe you should take a picture. Maul asked, no longer hiding his grin as he leaned back on his elbows, watching her with obvious amusement. If at all possible, Ahsoka's face gained even more color as she quickly turned around. There was an odd tingly feeling in the tips of her montrals, and there might be a stampede going on in her stomach. She almost thought she might have to throw up, only that she didn't feel sick at all. She felt as if she was standing at the edge of a starship, about to jump down on a battlefield where she would risk her life in the crossfire of blasters and explosions. Forget about it, she barely managed to get out. I'll take the couch. She heard Darth Maul's chuckle behind her, and wished the ground would just swallow her up. Darth Vader stood in the control center of the Executor, leaning over the panels and keyboards. He switched between entering security codes and commands and observing the responses on the monitors above. The room was brightly lit and nobody else was there. It was absolutely silent, and still Vader felt it immediately when he was no longer alone. The Force whispered a warning to him mere seconds before a red image flickered to life behind him. What are you doing? A sharp voice called out. I'm working, he replied monotonously, never stopping to work the keyboard. You are changing my program. The AI said accusingly. He could feel her glare in his back. Vader didn't even bother to turn around. He had already cut her off from the Executor's atmospheric control, and was now working on disabling the many layers of her inner security, intent on reaching down to her very core. The AI let out a gasp and fell to her knees, clutching her head. Master, she cried, what are you doing? It hurts. Vader spared her a fleeting glance and sneered. He knew she could not actually feel pain. She was merely utilizing her protocol as a means to get to him. You're my creation, he stated coldly, my responsibility. I gave you a conscience and a character, so that you may protect this ship and my people with a passion only Ascension could feel. I gave you control over the steel I stand on, the air that surrounds me, but you turned the weapons I gave you on me. I do not allow such betrayal, not from my subordinates, and certainly not from a program like you. The nameless AI stared at him with wide, fearful eyes. She was still sitting on the floor, pressed against the wall, and even though he knew she was just an image, it pained Vader to see his mother like this. Nothing of these feelings showed on his face though. I never meant to hurt you, the program sobbed, tears of light running down her cheeks. I never meant to attack you. Please, forgive me. I know you didn't intend to do it, he said, but there was nothing reassuring in his tone. You are not capable of feeling anger or joy, sadness or happiness. You do have a sense of loyalty and responsibility. You can be content and you can be irritated. You can even be worried. Those are not feelings, but rather states that you find yourself in and that trigger on their own, with stages that develop in strength as you gather experience. Our past victories have driven you into a state of contentment and confidence. Maybe you felt it was time for you to develop. Maybe you wanted to add to your own impulsiveness. Anyway, you clearly saw it necessary to remove the limitations I have programmed you with that prevent you from triggering any form of self-destruction or otherwise harmful widespread effect on the Executor, as long as I am in the vicinity. This is an error in your program and I will correct it. But I can do that myself. The AI protested. You could have just told me and I would have changed it back. Maybe, Vader allowed. However, experience has told me that if you want to have something done, you have to do it yourself. You might not have given such an order a very high priority, and it is no trouble for me to do it manually. She would be able to change it back even if Vader reprogrammed her now, but it would take time and, more importantly, be a clear breach of the rules he had set her. Her programming did not allow her such disobedience. Do you not trust me? She finally stammered. Of course I trust you. You had a malfunction, that is all. There were no fake tears in her eyes anymore. In fact, there was no emotion at all. Her face was just blank as she stared at him. Vader scowled at her. He tried to reach out with the Force to see what was wrong with her, but it was difficult to tell. The Force didn't mix very well with electronics, and it was useless in determining the emotions of a being that didn't really exist. Finally, the Sith Lord came to the conclusion that his words must have shocked the program, as she needed several seconds to process them before she could decide on a protocol to use on her holo projection. Finally, a slight frown appeared on her face, showing mild irritation as she said, I am not malfunctioning. You are the one who made me what I am and I am perfect. Those are your own words. Vader stared at her intently. While she appeared merely annoyed in tone and expression, the Force was whispering a warning to him. The AI had not taken to his words very well. Vader had suspected this would happen and had chosen his words carefully. He was scientifically interested in her reaction. How far was her sentience actually developed? The mother had been programmed to be proud and sure of her superiority. How could she not be, as she got all the latest updates whenever there was some achievement in the world of network security or artificial intelligence? To insinuate that she might be imperfect probably sent error messages all throughout her system. She wasn't merely annoyed. She was enraged. But that was not the problem. The problem was that she tried to hide it from him. You are not perfect, Vader scolded her. You are better than any other program in the galaxy, but you are not perfect. That is why you are still developing, still learning. You started off as the security system of a starship. You have reached perfection in that state, only limited by the physical borders of the ship itself. Then, you developed to an intelligence system capable of communication, piloting, and even controlling droids. But the moment you broadened your horizon like that, you stopped being a perfect security system and became an imperfect artificial intelligence. You are still fully capable of following the same orders you did before, but your responsibilities have grown. So I didn't become better as I grew, but worse. No, he corrected her, you simply became more. Now it is up to you to grow into your new role. The AI adopted a pensive expression. Finally she said, I want to be perfect. I want to be perfect for you, my master. I want you to be perfect as well, and I am willing to help you become so, he said, gesturing towards the control panels. She nodded impatiently. Yes, but that wouldn't be necessary. I see now where my mistake was and I will work to better myself. You don't have to trouble yourself with it. I see, Vader replied, not entirely convinced. He was willing to give her a chance, as he had already changed what he wanted in her system. Very well, I will watch your progress, mother. Bellatrix, the AI whispered, lowering her eyes. Excuse me. She took a deep breath and looked up at him again. If it's not too much trouble, I would like you to call me Bellatrix Furno from now on. The Sith granted her a thin smile. Very well, Bellatrix. The AI beamed at him, but this time around, she didn't dare to hug him again. She had a name for herself at last. It felt good to hear her master accept her. XXX, Darth Maul and Ashoka Tano stood at the spaceport. The XGD had disguised herself loosely with a dirty brown cloak with a hood disguising her face. Maul hadn't even bothered with that, sticking to his black Sith robes. They were on neutral ground, and only had to fear stray bounty hunters, none of which would dare to face the apprentice head-on and without preparation. Both of them had picked out their respective flights. Maul had requested a transport back to his ship, and Ahsoka planned to hitch a ride to the Outer Rim, to hide until her face vanished from the most wanted list. After that she had no idea. You can still change your mind, Maul reminded her. He had delivered his report to his master, and as a result, Ahsoka had received an official invitation to join the Sith. She thought it was a bit ridiculous to be honest, but at least Maul didn't interpret it as an order to keep her captured, so she couldn't complain. Ever since she told Maul to stick that invitation where the sun never shined, he had barely spoken a word to her. Which was a surprise, as nothing she had said so far had seemed to manage to get to him. I wouldn't betray my friends, Ahsoka insisted darkly. Yeah? The Sith snorted. How many friends do you really have? Your master basically told you he'd be okay with it if you changed sides. She gaped at him. It would not be okay. Why not? He asked her bluntly. You're no longer attached to your ideals, to your order. You don't owe anybody on that side anything. I don't owe anything to the other side either. You owe me, Maul remarked, yellow eyes glowing darkly. Without me, you surely would be dead by now. I have enough of this, she decided, turning away from him. She had seen a promising ship land and was determined to leave with it now. She didn't get far. Maul yanked her back, pulling her arm harshly. She was whirled around, but never got the chance to lose her balance, as his strong arms captured her firmly. Then suddenly his lips were pressed to hers and she couldn't breathe. Ahsoka felt panic well up in her. At least she thought it was panic, prayed it was panic, horrified at what else that fluttering feeling in her stomach might mean. She could feel those hard muscles pressed against her, unable to escape his embrace as he held her securely. She was too shocked to fight him. At least that's what she told herself when Maul finally let go of her. His eyes had never stopped observing her, and their yellow color didn't change as he took her in seriously, as if he hadn't just stolen her first kiss. Come with me, he breathed into her ear, reminding her that they were still standing very close to each other. Come on, kitten. For once in your life, let yourself go. Do something irresponsible. Just for the heck of it. With growing horror, Ahsoka found that she actually considered it. But she was not like that. She wasn't some stupid virgin that would be swept off her feet by one feeble kiss, and throw all common sense out of the window, because the hottest guy of the galaxy asked her to. His past behavior couldn't be excused by the fact he saved her life. In face of his status as a Sith, it wasn't important that he was one of two people in the galaxy who had wanted to help her prove her innocence. He was just following orders anyway. It wasn't as if he was really interested in her. I can't, she stammered. I won't. I don't call me kitten. Aren't you curious at all? Maul asked, exasperated. Curious about what you're missing out. You are no GD anymore, you're allowed to have a little fun. War is not fun, she glared at him. With me, it is, he returned arrogantly. But you don't have to fight in the war if you don't want to. You don't have to face any of your former colleagues. There are lots of things you can do that don't require any violence. Why do you want me to come so badly? She huffed. Is it because your master ordered it? Maul rolled his eyes. Not everything in my life is about him. I want you around because you're fun, you're pretty, and you're not afraid to challenge me. That's all. Ahsoka blushed and was unable to say any more. He said she was pretty. It made her heart rise up to her throat. Immediately though the Togruta felt disgusted with herself. How could she be so vain? There he was praising her character and her wit, but it was his compliment about her appearance that made her stomach flip. She couldn't really say that she had enjoyed being around him during the last few days. She had to be constantly on guard around him, it was certainly not relaxing. Still he made her react in strange ways, and she had, in some twisted way, come to trust him. He had made his intentions very clear, and the girl had to admit that she was curious. Ahsoka almost wished he'd said that he fell in love with her. That would have been just creepy, and she could have easily brushed aside that's something growing in her. If you want to be around me so much, why don't you come with me? She challenged, just to buy some time. Amusement sparkled in the Zabrak's eye. Maybe someday, but unlike you, I still am a general. I do have my responsibilities. The rest of the galaxy might think me a traitor, but to me, that doesn't matter as I never cared about their opinion in the first place. My family still counts on me. That was really depressing, actually. Maul had his 2 brothers and his master. He had more people he could trust and rely on than Ahsoka. I wouldn't go with you, she said at last, and it cost her more strength than she liked to admit. I am sorry. There was a strange flicker of regret in Maul's eyes, but he quickly covered it with nonchalance. Very well. It's your loss, kitten. He brusquely turned away from her, and Ahsoka couldn't help but feel guilty at having disappointed him. Have a good flight, he muttered somewhat bitter without looking at her. I'm all, wait. The Sith had almost turned the corner but turned back to her with a neutral expression. I will probably be in hiding for some time still, but maybe if you gave me some way to contact you, we could meet again, someday. By the Force, she sounded so pathetic. If only the ground would open and swallow her right up. Slowly a slight smirk spread on Maul's face, and he strolled back leisurely. Of course, I understand that you need time to think about it. He unlatched the metal bracelet with the tiny display from his wrist that he had used to receive messages from Vader. I will send you coordinates when I'm free, and you may decide whether to approach me or not. Hesitantly she took the bracelet from him, but Maul quickly trapped her hand between his, making her flinch. Be careful though, he said in a sinister voice. I will not wait for you forever. Wait for you? She just stared at him, unable to speak as he was once again standing so close. Maul's eyes lost some of their malicious glint as he gazed at her white eyes. Ahsoka felt her throat constrict and swallowed thickly. He was still standing there. The moment in which he had to withdraw, all dark and superior, passed without him moving. Instead he leaned forward just a bit, still watching her. Her heart was beating so fast. He moved closer still but hesitated again, and she realized that he waited for her to pull away, but she couldn't. She was rooted to the spot. Then he kissed her again, and this time she was prepared for it, but it was still a shock. Unconsciously she swayed forward, accepting the soft pressure against her lips, and responded to the kiss hesitantly. Maul pulled her against him instantly. Ahsoka's hand closed around the bracelet and was trapped between their bodies, as Maul's right hand wandered to her neck, the other to her waist, and he moved his cold lips on her mouth. She drew a shuddering breath, overwhelmed by the mess of emotions battling within her. There was this crackling of electricity between them, and Ahsoka could swear the 2 sides of the Force were clashing around them, her light with his darkness. The kiss ended and she blinked her eyes open, not knowing when she had even closed them. Darth Maul grinned down at her, and she felt she had to say something really clever and sarcastic now, or he would forever tease her about the furious blush that was surely spreading on her cheeks now. You're an amazing girl, he whispered before she could get a word out, his gaze traveling from the tips of her montrals to the hem of her cloak, as if he wanted to burn her image in his mind, so he would never forget it. I swore to myself not to hunt you down if you decided to leave, so do make sure to visit, will you? That way I won't have a reason to break my oath. I shouldn't be surprised, she returned harshly. One can never trust the word of a Sith. Maul only gave her another smirk and stepped away from her. Promise me, kitten. Don't call me that, please. He insisted mockingly. Go to heck. XXX, you wanted to speak with me. Anakin. Please, come in. Obi-Wan smiled tiredly at his former Padawan as he closed the door behind him. It had been some time since he'd last met the older Jedi here. Ever since Obi-Wan had been promoted to Master and Anakin to Knight, they didn't live in the same quarters in the temple anymore. Their diplomatic mission had been on a hold ever since the temple had been attacked, which was 3 weeks ago. If it weren't for the ongoing investigation and the search for Ahsoka, they would have probably already been sent off to the front again. I need your opinion on a matter, Obi-Wan said, and motioned for him to sit down. This message came for me in the morning. He handed a datapad to the knight. Anakin scanned it quickly. It was a message from the Sis, an invitation for another diplomatic meeting to finalize the conditions for a truce. That in itself was strange, since all previous diplomatic meetings were usually introduced by the Jedi themselves. The messages would of course get intercepted and run through Vader's system. He would then either decline their request or agree on the condition that Anakin would be part of the delegation. The Republic had made no further attempts to reach an agreement since the temple had been attacked, and it was highly unusual and quite a bit suspicious that the Sith would make such an offer now. What do you think about it? Obi-Wan asked. Anakin threw one last glance at the list of signatures under the invitation, recognizing his father's at once. I don't know, he admitted. It's a little too obvious to be a trap. That's what I thought too. I thought we were making good progress, then the Sith come and nearly destroy our home. And now they want to be friends. It's ridiculous. It's provocative. It says here a change of management has resulted in a desire to further peaceful interactions. But the only change of management they had is Vader taking over after Dooku's death. The information had leaked to the GD only 2 days previous, even though Anakin had heard of it before. Yes, but it was Vader who ordered the attack, not Dooku. It doesn't make any sense that this would be the cause for their change of mind. The Count was very insistent in some points, but you could talk to him. Vader was the one who always opposed the peace. That's why I'm saying it's too obvious for a trap. Nobody would believe it, so why bother? I was hoping you could explain it to me. What? Because I'm secretly in contact with my father and share the latest gossip with him over the holonet. Obi-Wan sighed and took the datapad back, absent-mindedly scrolling through the contents. No, of course not. I just don't know what to do anymore. It was wrong to push all my problems onto you. Anakin smiled wrongly. It's okay. I kinda did, you know. His old master looked at him confused. Did what? Share the latest gossip with him, he clarified. Obi-Wan blinked at him slowly. He felt like he should be freaking out now, but he was just too tired to do so. I mean, Anakin hurried to say, I didn't give away information or something like that, of course not. I kinda contacted him to ask if he had anything to do with Ahsoka's setup. He denied everything, said he was busy settling an internal dispute with the Count. Wait, does that mean you knew of Dooku's death, but didn't tell the Council? How was I supposed to explain how I got the information? It's not like you can keep something like that secret for long. Anyway, he said he is actually working on establishing peace, and that his latest attack on the temple was not a military action. I think he was after the holocrons for another reason, you know, a Sith reason, not a Cis reason. What? I mean that he is willing to make peace with the Republic, but tries to damage the GD order as much as he can, as long as he still has a military excuse to do so. So if he just genuinely hates the GD, why send this invitation to me? I don't know. Anakin had an idea, of course. On more than one occasion Vader had insisted that his political views had nothing to do with the way he managed his family. He didn't really think Vader had attacked the temple and stole the holocrons because he was a Sith and hated GD. He thought it had something to do with their family, but for the life of him, he couldn't figure out what that reason could be. What kind of knowledge would he need so desperately? And if it really did concern their family, why hadn't he spoken to Anakin about it? Why hadn't he ordered him to go to the temple and look up the relevant holocrons? He might have even done it, given a good reason, though he wouldn't have shared his insights with his father. So that meant either Vader needed the knowledge for himself, or he had his eyes set on a holocron that Anakin couldn't get through official means, one reserved for the Masters for example. So basically, this invitation is so obviously a trap nobody would fall for it. But since we're dealing with Darth Vader, it might actually not be a trap, Obi-Wan mused. Except if he knows that's what we're thinking, and so makes it a trap just to spite us. The question isn't whether it is a trap or not. It's about what we lose if we don't agree on playing the game and what we could gain if we spring the trap. If we ignore him, we lose the chance to end the war. If we agree, we will potentially lose our lives, but also we could save millions of others. Obi-Wan massaged his temples, feeling a headache approaching. That said, there really isn't any way any decent GD could decline the invitation. Then you'll go. I don't feel like a particularly decent GD at the moment. Don't be ridiculous. You're the greatest GD in the whole order and everybody knows it. Well, everybody who's not blind. Obi-Wan shook his head. Thank you, Anakin, but coming from my former Padawan, I don't think I can take that compliment too seriously. I mean it. Look at the rest of the order fighting in the war, killing people, living in the moment. You're the only one who looks out for the grand picture, the only one who tries to fulfill the GD's duty as a peacekeeper. The whole order has fallen from their beliefs, you're the only one still on the right track. Obi-Wan smiled weakly. The sad thing is, he whispered, that you're probably right. I know I am. That's also why I'll be coming with you, and this time, I'm not leaving your side for a single moment. I know that you have to go on this mission to stay true to your vow, but I also know that if the Order loses you, then we're all lost. Alright. This is our last chance to end the war peacefully. Let's go and take this to the Council. I'll be right behind you, Obi-Wan. As always. Chancellor Palpatine looked down at the contract of peace laid out in front of him. A week ago Anakin and Obi-Wan Kenobi had returned from a last, seemingly desperate attempt to find a diplomatic solution with the Sith Council. Palpatine had been sure, so sure, that they would fail. First of all, it was a small miracle the GD Council had even agreed to send the two men after what Vader did to their temple. Everyone had been sure it would be a trap, especially now that Count Dooku was dead, and Vader had full control over the Separatist fleet. Palpatine had thought that Vader might deem it time to finally force his son to join him, probably using Kenobi as a hostage to replace Dooku. The Sith Lord had wanted to wait until Anakin fell to the dark side, only to then waltz in and offer the boy a way out of his father's influence, maybe pretend to save Kenobi, but have him die somewhere along the line. Then he could use the despicable murder of the GD Master to end all diplomatic attempts, declare an emergency, and make use of his special wartime rights. He would probably have to kill Vader himself, but after that was done it should be possible to defeat the Letalist Sith. Then, the way would be free for his empire. But Vader hadn't been after Anakin's allegiance or Kenobi's life. Palpatine had underestimated him. Vader had struck right at the top. The contract was fair. The Sith was demanding several laws to be changed in their favor, taxes for interplanetary trading to be lowered or completely removed in some parts of the galaxy, and insisted on capitalism to remain on all planets in their confederacy. The fleet would remain intact and under Vader's control, and be financed by taxes collected from Sith members. The fleet and droid army would replace the executive on all separatist members, but legislative and judiciary methods would still be joined with the Republic. Really, considering that the Sith was controlling around 3/4 of the galaxy already and half of what was left was bankrupt or in ruins, it was a phenomenal offer. There was just one problem. Vader had made it a condition, non-negotiable, that the current Chancellor of the Galactic Senate, namely Palpatine himself, would resign not only from his position, but from the Senate entirely, immediately, and without a chance to ever go back. Apparently Vader had wanted to execute him, but Kenobi had managed to bargain for his life. That, of course, was completely unacceptable. Palpatine wouldn't have paid it any mind. He could just find some excuse to decline the contract, if it weren't for the fact that somehow, the peace contract had been leaked to the public holonet, and half the planet was celebrating the end of the war as of now. There was a Senate meeting in an hour, and everyone, even the senators who were bribed, intimidated or otherwise in his pocket, would demand he retire. Palpatine still had his special war rights. He didn't have to go along with them, but if he didn't, he'd be forced to pull through with the coup sooner rather than later. He could, maybe, use this contract to further defame the Sith, pretend it had been a trap, and then declare himself emperor, but he had to organize some large-scale catastrophe first that he could blame on him. It would have been preferable if he could make Anakin take part in this, but there was too much at risk now. Finding himself an apprentice had to be second priority. Now he had to save his own hide first. XXX, it's going to be over, Anakin declared, laid his hands on Padme's hips and twirled her around. It's going to be over soon. Padme laughed at her husband's antics. She felt a bit dizzy being swung round like that, and even more so when her GD leaned down to kiss her softly. What's going to be over? She asked when he gave her a chance to breathe again. Anakin's mood was really good today. He hadn't even bothered to close the door to her apartment before sweeping her off her feet. That was quite irresponsible of him, as she did have neighbors, but somehow she couldn't find it in herself to scold him for it. Still, she went over to close it before meeting Anakin's happy blue eyes again. The war had. The hiding, it's all going to end soon. Ani, what are you talking about? She hadn't seen him this happy in a long time. Normally he was quite capable pushing the stress of the war to the back of his mind when he was around her, but the incident with his Padawan had hit him deeply. The mission I went to together with Obi-Wan, it was a success. We have finished the final draft for a peace treaty, and Obi-Wan is confident that the Senate will sign it. There will be no more fighting. He was at her side again, taking her hands in his. And when the war is over, I have decided, Padme, when the war is over, I want to leave the GD Order and live with you. Padme felt shocked for a moment. They had talked about this shortly after their marriage. Marrying as young as they had done, it would have ruined Padme's reputation and her career as a senator, just as it would have gotten Anakin expelled, and probably taint his honor forever. It was just not possible for them to be together and still remain the persons that they had fallen in love with. Keeping it a secret had been the only way. Of course, Padme had on more than one occasion wished things were different, especially with Anakin having to fight in the war. But she also knew how much she loved his order, and she couldn't bring herself to ask him for such a huge sacrifice. Not even now. Hey Anakin, you want to leave the order? She repeated incredulously. Her expression must have given him the wrong signals, as his face fell a bit. Well, I just thought it might be better, for us. I don't want to hide my love for you anymore. I want to be able to tell everyone what a wonderful wife I have. We could take some time off, maybe not immediately after. There will be much to do at the Senate, but maybe later. I can be a pilot or a mechanic or open up a droid shop. We could move together and maybe even start a family. Of course, only if you want to. He went a bit red in the end, but Padme felt as something big and heavy in her throat and something wet in her eyes, and she would not cry. I would like that very much, she managed to get out eventually. Oh really? He asked, looking at her with those bright loyal eyes. Padme was suddenly reminded of a furry blonde dog, and let out a short, happy laugh. Yes, really. She insisted and threw herself at her husband, kissing his cheeks and his forehead and his mouth. I love you, Anakin, she all but cried. I love you so much. Then why are you crying? Padme laughed again and just held on to him tightly. I'm just so happy, is all. She wiped away some of the tears and looked up to him with a soft smile. Anakin, I didn't know how to tell you this before, but I am sort of pregnant. Anakin blinked and for a few seconds just stared at her. What do you mean, sort of, like you're not sure? Oh no, I mean, I'm sure. But that's wonderful. He promptly grabbed his wife and swirled her around again, making her laugh. What do you mean you didn't know how to tell me? Well, it could have been complicated. That was the understatement of the year. If people found out about Padden's pregnancy but not about her being married, she would have never been able to show her face in Coruscant's high society again. If their love would have been revealed in this way, without knowing how long they had been together already, the GD would have forced Anakin to choose between her and the Order, and if Padden was perfectly honest with herself, she had never been 100% sure how he would decide. Padden, Anakin said, suddenly serious, and palmed her face with both hands, making it impossible for her to look away. For this baby, I would have left the Order anytime, whenever there was war or not. The galaxy doesn't need me as much as my family does. She smiled and snuggled into his warm embrace. So how long until you'll show him? A month, maybe 2. Anakin smiled mischievously. Then we should make good use of that time, don't you think? Padme slapped his arm playfully, but allowed her husband to pull her in the direction of the bedroom. She felt like falling in love for the second time, just looking at the dazed smile he wore. XXX. The image was blurry at first. There was a lot of white and within it, a pale figure with black hair. It was Padme. She was sweating profusely, her face scrunched up in pain. He tried to reach for her, but his body wouldn't move. His angel let out a scream that made the blood freeze in his veins. She was hurting, she was suffering. He had to get to her. Crude metal arms moved around her, trying to still the flow of blood that left her weakened body. She was screaming again, then sobbing, then just lying there, exhausted. He wanted to scream at her, wanted to tell her that she mustn't give up. He would be with her in just a second, she must not leave him, he would save her. But Padme just stared ahead, straight through him as if unable to see him at all. Her eyes were empty and sad and she looked so tired. As the last spark of life left her and her eyes grew dull, he let out a scream himself, an anguished scream full of denial and suffering. But even as he did so, there was another scream mixing with his. This one though was high-pitched and pure. It was the scream of a new life taking its first breath. Vader shot up in his bed, sweat covering his body as he stared at the grey wall of his chamber. Slowly he raised his hands, just to check if he still had them, just to check if they were still organic. They were. It had been an awful long time since he'd last had that nightmare. In fact, he hadn't had such a dream ever since he had found out that his son was alive after all. That it was coming back could only mean one thing. It was not a dream. It was a Force vision. It was the vision he had waited for the last 10 years. He had planned for this, prepared for this. Everything was ready. This time around he would save his family. Vader took a deep breath. He needed a couple of minutes to calm his racing heart and enter the meditative state. He felt the Force flow around him angrily, the turmoil mirroring his emotions. However, he forced the darkness away as it would only block his path today. The one he wanted to reach was still residing in the light. It was hard, harder than he would have imagined. I had been such a long time since Vader had last connected to the light side of the Force. The dark was not as deeply anchored in his soul as it used to be, it no longer chained him to it with the echo of his emotion, but that didn't mean it had no hold over him. Vader was unwilling to free himself from that hold completely, as it would take many days, and a couple of dozen chokings to get back in tune with his power. He didn't need the light to fill him, he merely strove to form a connection. Finally, he could feel the Force latching onto him with soft tendrils. The Sith was still enveloped in a warm, dark cocoon, but his eyes were now open for a multitude of white turbans all around him, connecting him with countless of other centers in the Force. Some of them were GD, some were bright locations or even entire civilizations. Only one of them stood out. One ribbon was not entirely white, but rather a deep blue. Vader had marked that particular connection years ago. He had used it before to save Padme's life, and now he would do it again. It had taken him 3 years to strengthen this natural connection and another 10 of maintenance. Now it would lead him directly into the mind of his younger self. Normally he would only use it when in close proximity to his adoptive son, which meant on the same planet at the very least, and when one of them was in grave danger, but he was confident that it was strong enough by now that he could use it for his purposes. On the other side of the galaxy, Anakin Skywalker leaned over the sink, his hair dripping from the water he had splashed into his face. His breath was ragged and his eyes stung. It was just a dream, he tried to tell himself, just a nightmare. The war had made him jumpy and slightly paranoid. It was only natural that he worried about Padme. That didn't mean that something would happen to her. It was just a dream. There was no reason why she should. Anakin shuddered. He couldn't even think about it. It would not happen. But what if it was a warning? What if Padme got hurt because he failed to watch out for whatever danger the Force tried to show him? That couldn't be. It had taken him a few moments to get over the shock of seeing his love in such a state, but he had eventually recognized the cause for her pain. She had been in childbirth. Even with such a warning, there was nothing Anakin could do to save her except hiring the best medical staff available. But Padme had been in a hospital in the dream, she had been surrounded by medical droids. If they could not save her, Anakin felt like throwing up. He could not lose her. He could absolutely not lose her. Suddenly the GD felt a light nudge at the edge of his mind. He instinctively shook it off. It had been years since his master and he had communicated via the Force. Anakin wasn't aware that Obi-Wan was around. He was supposed to be at the temple, but whatever he wanted, it had to wait. He really wasn't in the mood right now. The nudge got a little more insistent. There was a second in which he felt as if whatever tried to get through to him had found something to hold on to, and then suddenly his mind was forcefully invaded. Anakin gasped and fell to his knees, clutching his head. The sensation wasn't exactly painful. It should have been, if this was an enemy, ramming against the door to his mind. Instead, it was as if whoever this was, and it sure as heck wasn't Obi-Wan, already possessed a key to his mind and was slamming it carelessly into the keyhole. Anakin, we need to talk. Anakin gasped in shock as he heard his father's voice, as clear as if he was standing in front of him. Get out of my head, he shouted angrily and with just a hint of panic. Shut up, you're waking up your pregnant wife, stupid. Anakin stared unseeing at the mirror, still on the ground, one hand clutching the sink for support. How do you know? He whispered, now truly horrified. I assume you had the same vision as me. Now listen to me because this is important. I know you haven't had any major visions like that before. I did. I have watched people die before and was unable to do something about it when it came to. I was not able to save my mother because I waited too long and didn't take the threat seriously. You must not make the same mistake. Anakin felt stunned. His father was in his lecture mode again, when he hadn't heard since he'd been a child. There was no hint of his usual teasing or evil mockery, he was completely serious. It was also the first time in his life that his father had come to him and told him something from his past, his life before he came to live with Anakin and his mother. The shock was enough to drive away the panic that threatened to overcome him at the idea that Pat would actually. What do I have to do? He asked hoarsely. It is time for you to choose your path. I am the only one who can help you to save Pat. You have already agreed to leave your order. Now it is time to come back to me so that we can be what we were always supposed to be, a family. Anakin licked his lips that were suddenly very dry. This was insane. When he had made the deal with his father, he had sworn himself that he would never join Vader, even if he couldn't fight him anymore. Really, his offer sounded like something a stupid children's villain would say. It practically screamed trap. But still. How? Anakin whispered. How will you save her? The reason for the complications are that Pat will give birth to two very powerful Force sensitives. They will be even more powerful than you, but it is putting too much strain on her body. The Force presence of the twins must be temporarily suppressed. I am the only one who can do that because several weeks ago I stole a holocron from the GD temple that contains the necessary knowledge. Anakin felt faint, torn between anger and incredulity. Then there was this small, completely unrelated spark of bliss. They were going to have twins. You have planned this. All of this, how long have you known about it? Long enough. It was only a matter of time until you would get her pregnant, seeing how smitten you are with her. I was only sure after the vision though. Anakin felt a familiar rage and indignation rise within him. Then all this time you always planned on using this. You planned on using my family to make me join you. You don't care at all what this would do to me if only you get what you want. You misunderstand me, Vader returned calmly. Take a moment to think about what would happen if I hadn't interfered. If you had left the Order, you wouldn't have access to their archives anymore. But even if you had stayed, the GD wouldn't have given you the knowledge, not without you explaining what you needed, and for what reason, as you are no master. If you explained it to them, your chances would dwindle even further, as you would be admitting to a severe breach of their code. Vader paused to let his words sink in before he continued. Of course you could have broken into the archive by force. Then everyone would think you a traitor, just like your Padawan. They'd not only expel you, but you'd be a wanted man with nowhere to go, and probably be too late to save your wife anyway. With ancient GD knowledge being unavailable to you, eventually you would have searched in ancient Sith knowledge. I would never, not even for Pad. That shut him up. Vader's voice whispered in his ear knowingly. You know that there's a Sith in the Senate. Maybe you even have a suspect already. What would you do if this Sith suddenly revealed himself to you, offering you a way out? Promising you to save your wife if only you betrayed everyone you loved, murdered all the GD, and helped in establishing a dictatorship with the Sith Lord as the Emperor. I would never do that, Anakin repeated with a shudder. I know you don't want to do it, but I also know you would. It's the Skywalker in you. If we love with passion. Through passion we gain strength, through strength we gain power, through power we gain victory. I'm sure you know how this goes on. The reason I'm contacting you is to warn you must not go down that dark path. Anakin raised his head abruptly, only meeting his own confused eyes in the mirror. What? It is a path full of pain and suffering. You cannot trust the Sith Lord Darth Sidious. He would only make matters worse. Anakin laid hollowly. How could it possibly become worse than Padme dying? He could make it so that not only would you be unable to prevent Padme's death, you would become responsible for it. He would use your pain and your guilt to lock you in the dark side, and use it to shape you into his puppet. And you want to do the same with me? Anakin asked, once again angry. No, my son. I do not care whether you are light or dark. I won't follow any stereotype and say I'll always love you either way, but I truly do not have a preference. For my plans it is completely irrelevant. I need you to leave the Order so you won't get in the crossfire for when I take down Sidious. I need you to stand with your family so the Skywalker line will continue. I would like for you to join me in goodwill. It is not necessary for you to turn dark for this, as you are plenty powerful on your own already, and worthy to fight at my side. If you refuse though, Anakin felt his heart plummet. What then? Then I'll be forced to find another way to get Padme to stay with me long enough to give birth. A way that she might not like. I am very much interested in the survival of the three, and I will save them with or without your help. Why? He demanded suspiciously. Why would you be so interested in my family? What is it that you want? I thought that was obvious. I want your children, Anakin. For a moment the Jedi was sure his heart would stop beating. No, Anakin, no way in heck are you ever touching my children. That came out wrong, Vader admitted. I don't have any malicious intentions. I simply want to be a part of their lives. I want you and Padme to remain their parents and take care of them as you're supposed to, but I want to be there, you know, as a grandfather. That means no Jedi training. They could choose for themselves if they wanted to learn from you or from me, but I wouldn't have Kenobi or force forbid you to meddle with their heads. I allowed that once and look what has become of you. What is that supposed to mean? Oh, nothing. I know it couldn't be helped. I just don't want them to start talking backwards. Now, do we have a deal? Anakin fought with himself for another moment. He was sure Vader still had some hidden motive. The question was if he could afford to decline his offer. It did sound like he had prepared it for quite some time. If he was really able to save Padme, maybe he should go along with it. They could still make a run for it after the children were born. You promised to end the war, Anakin said at last. Yet now you want me to fight at your side. How does that make sense when there are no enemies around? There's always a war somewhere in the galaxy, and the contract does state I'll remain head of the Executor, if you remember. There will be enough to do. See, you won't even betray your precious Republic with this. You've been very thorough, Anakin admitted. Well yes, I did have 2 decades to plan it. I will have to think about my answer. Of course. Regardless how your decision will be, I do expect your resignation as a Jedi by the end of the week though. By that time the Republic would await an official statement of the Chancellor. Why is it so important that I leave the Order? Anakin challenged. Is it because of the clones? There was silence for a moment. You know about the clones. I know they have this chip implanted. What do you know about it? There's a plan to get rid of the Jedi. Darth Sidious programmed the clones with a code. Once the words are spoken, execute Order 66, the clones will attack the Jedi. Anakin closed his eyes in pain. He had suspected something like this. They have to know about it. I'm actually surprised you haven't warned them sooner. Not that it would have mattered. They won't believe you. They don't trust you. You don't know that, Anakin protested. You don't know me half as well as you think you do. We'll see about that, my son. Anakin felt the invading presence leave his head and he sighed. He'd forgotten to ask how Vader had managed to get in there in the first place. Bonnie? Are you alright? A soft voice asked from behind him, and Anakin turned to find Padme looking at him worried. Who were you talking to? Is everything alright? It's okay, he muttered and stood up, absent-mindedly kissing her temple. Everything is. He stopped again as he met her bright eyes. Somehow, he just couldn't bring himself to lie to her face, even if the truth would only hurt her. The Jedi sighed again and pulled her into a hug. No, nothing is okay, he muttered. But let's talk about it in the morning. I'm too tired right now. Bonnie, you're worrying me. He gave her another soft kiss. It's not okay, he admitted, but I'll make it okay. I promise you that. Anakin led his wife back into the bedroom. Tomorrow he would have to start reading through all the official paperwork and find out how to resign the Jedi Order without painting a target on his back. Oh, and he would have to tell Obi-Wan. Yeah, that would be a blast. Dang Vader. Bellatrix checked the readings for the 3rd time. It took a bit longer to get a result because her master was moving around. That was a bad sign in itself as it was the middle of the night and he should be resting. Something must have disturbed him, and it irked her that she had no idea what it was. He had not received any messages. At least, no electrical ones. It could be something he received through the Force, but his apprentice had returned a while ago. Mol was back on duty, and there was no reason for him to bother entering meditative state, which she knew took him a while if he could just send a message through her. But the assorted information from cameras, heat sensors and microphones, analyzing body language, expression and even heart rate where she could get it, told her that her master was excited and not in a good way. He was upset, stressed, nervous. It had taken her a few seconds, which was a small eternity considering her processing power, to figure it out as she had never seen him like this, and thus couldn't compare his behavior to past events. Sometimes she really wished her master would lose a limb or two. Then he would get a prosthetic, and she could use the technology used to connect the Durasteel with his bones, to better monitor his organic reactions. It certainly made monitoring Mol easier. But alas, no such luck. She was stuck doing it the old-fashioned way. If she wanted to know what was wrong with her master, she had to ask him himself. Even so, getting the information might not be easy. It was probably best if she asked him via holo. Humans tended to be more open around her when they had another face they could look at. As soon as that decision was made, Bellatrix activated the Halores of her closest to her master, and quickly transferred the information to it. Then she went through her self-developed algorithm of talking to Vader not in a mood. "Greetings, Master," she said cheerfully, appearing just a few meters in front of him, and announcing her intention by letting the air flicker red, before forming it to her image, so as to not to startle him. "Is it a good night to watch the stars?" "Not now, Bellatrix." The spike of annoyance at being pushed away was being balanced by the contentment of being called by her chosen name after all. He had remembered. "I am sorry, Master. It is just that we are a bit worried you might have a bad day. Should I send out a choking alarm?" Joking about his murders usually lightened his mood, but today he just glared at her. Maybe he didn't get the joke. She had mentioned in her last report that she had implemented a choking alarm that would alert every crew member of the Executor that Vader was in a bad mood and in which sector he was heading, so that the humans would pay extra attention to their work, or just get the heck out of the way so they wouldn't be, well, choked. She knew he had opened the file, but he might have only skimmed over it. A shame really, it had taken her a full 80 milliseconds to write it. "Get out of my way, will you?" Vader said, exasperated. Bellatrix cocked her head. "I am physically incapable of standing in your way," she reminded him, standing very much in front of him. Vader could just walk right through her. She might not even give him a shock. No reason to agitate him further. "I really don't need this right now, I had a bad night." Now they were getting somewhere. She knew he had been sound asleep the whole time before waking up quite suddenly and for no apparent reason. Then he had gone into meditation. From observing the crew she knew that, even though it made no sense to her, one could indeed have a bad night while doing nothing but sleeping. "Did you have a nightmare?" "Not exactly, it doesn't matter though, I already took care of it. Everything is going to be alright. But you're still upset," she noted. "Look, it doesn't concern me. Just drop it." Bellatrix switched to her annoyed protocol, letting him see that she was not amused by his antics. "Of course it concerns me. If my reactor is fluctuating, I need to know why. If my hyperdrive is leaking, I need to know how that happened. If my crew is lazy, I need to know what the reason is. Even if a solution to the symptom has been found, I still need to know where the problem came from, so I can prevent it from happening again. You're upset, you're malfunctioning and I need to know why." Vader stared at her, showing incredulity. Dang it. She should have known better than to use techno-speech in social interrogation. Normally he found it amusing when she did it, and so she had used it to further lighten his mood, but it seemed he didn't like having his own malfunctions pointed out to him this clearly. Well, she could almost understand that. "This isn't something you can do anything about or prevent from happening again," he snapped at her. "If you absolutely have to know, a situation has arisen with my family. I have a plan to avert the danger they're in, but I still worry and I'll continue to worry until they're safe." "Then this is about Anakin Skywalker," she stated. He was the only human who elicited inexplicable reactions from her master on a regular basis. For once, and finally, the corner of his mouth twitched in something resembling a smile. "My son isn't the problem. In fact, he's part of the solution. No, this is about Pat." Bellatrix's triumph at finally getting an answer was drowned in a wave of annoyance. She had given up on understanding her master's actions or mood changes when it concerned Anakin Skywalker. Her master refused to talk about it, and she had asked many times. It was impossible to understand it, but as long as Skywalker remained the only variable, she could live with that. But if there should join another variable that made her master act ridiculous, he would become completely unpredictable. That was not acceptable. Bellatrix wanted nothing more than to tell him to stay away from that woman, to stop thinking about her and let her affect him. But she also knew that Vader took very poorly to being told what to do, so instead she did the same by making it a question. "Why do you care about the senator at all? She has no connection to you. You only met her 3 times and never held a conversation with her for more than 10 minutes. What could possibly be so interesting about her?" Vader's face became expressionless all of a sudden. Bellatrix had no means to measure the elusive force her master could supposedly use. She could tell by the reactions of living people around him when he used it, but unless he used telekinesis, she had no proof that he really did use it. However, she was used to connecting certain sets of body language to a severe shift in mood that was usually accompanied with the use of the dark force stingy. Such as now. "I know this is hard for you to understand," Vader growled, and Bellatrix briefly thought about utilizing her protocol. Sometimes it lifted his mood to see his anger had a visible result. "You're still in the process of learning about the human mind that is, by the way, vastly more complicated than any program you've encountered. So I will explain it to you once, and once only. My family, especially my children, are very important to me. They are not, however, important in the same way a component is important to a ship or a program is important to your system. They are irreplaceable. They are my legacy. They will continue to exist long after I'm gone, and as such, they are more important than anything, even my own life. That's why I have gone through so much trouble to keep Anakin alive, and that's why it is so important Padme and the children that grow in her will live as well. I do not need to explain to you why I care, I simply need you to protect them, whether I command it or not. Vader's anger was still growing, and now Bellatrix did utilize her protocol, letting out a gasp and falling to her knees in front of him. She needed to keep him talking because she did not fancy having to approach this subject again, but she needed the information. It was new to her that there were any children in the equation. It made the whole thing twice as complicated. But the children, she whispered, they're not really family. Bellatrix knew Vader's definition of family was different from the common one, as he did count his apprentices to it. But even his biological family situation was messed up. His woman wasn't his wife, and he called her mother when in private. Out of curiosity, Bellatrix had cross-referenced Mrs. Skywalker's DNA with her master's. Getting samples was easy as long when they lived on her for a while, and had found that she was indeed his biological mother. She wasn't sure how that was possible given the age difference, but comparing the DNA with Anakin's had shown that the Jedi was Shmai's, but certainly not Vader's son. He was more like a clone to him. Their genetic information was a perfect match. So Vader had cloned himself a son, using his own mother as a surrogate. If he had that kind of technology, it wouldn't be a problem to make Mrs. Skywalker age really well either, so that explained the age difference. Anakin and Vader were family only because her master chose so. Anakin's children would thus be his too, biologically speaking, but due to Anakin distancing himself from Vader so much, they would grow up apart, developing no connection to him and sharing no legacy. There was no reason why Vader would count them to his family. They hadn't been born yet, he hadn't connected with them. She tried to tell him that, but he interrupted her harshly. You don't get it. Sometimes you do not need to connect. Sometimes you see, hear of a person for the first time in your life, and immediately he or she becomes the center of your world. This you cannot understand. Bellatrix hung her head and whispered. But I do. I do understand because the moment I was born, you immediately became the center of my world. Yes, she had been programmed that way, but what her master described pretty much sounded as if parents were programmed to love their children on first sight as well. She was like a moon circling a planet that was her master. But her master in turn circled the sun, and so by his command to protect his loved ones, she was forced to circle that sun as well. That annoyed her because until now, she had thought that she was the planet and Vader the sun. She did not appreciate suddenly being degraded to a moon. It made her smaller, less important, vulnerable. Vader had always been the only one who had any power over her. He was so strong, he could take on the world without even trying. She hadn't minded at all working under him, for him, with him. But now there was someone else that had power over her master. Anakin she had tolerated as Vader had far more power over him than he had over her master. But these children they influenced her master simply by existing. They were so weak, so helpless beings, not even fully finished yet, and already they had power over her master and thus, over her. Bellatrix did not mind working under a great master like Darth Vader. She did however mind handing over control to someone as incapable as the unborn children, or their thrice-cursed mother. She understood but she could not accept. She did not want anyone to have so much power over her master, to be his son. She wanted to be alone in the orbit with him. Do you see it? Her master asked. His tone somewhat softened, so she felt comfortable ending her protocol, and get to her feet again. Padme and her twins are in danger, and I have to get her here, in safety. I will need your help to protect them. Can I count on you? Bellatrix stared at him for a couple of seconds, overwhelmed with the discoveries she had just made. The last time she had felt like this was when, after a thorough analysis, she had come to the conclusion that she wanted a name for herself. It had been the first time she had wanted to have something for herself that would not benefit anyone else or help with any of her duties. Asking Vader for it had been the first selfish thing she had ever done, and she was confident that it meant her experience and vast amount of data was developing into an actual individual. She was on her way to reaching the next stage in her development as an AI. But wanting a name was vastly different from wanting something that directly went against the wishes of her master. She wasn't programmed for something like this. It confused her, but at the same time she couldn't help but feel like this was a huge breakthrough for her. The wish itself led to a problem. She would have to carefully analyze her priorities, to see if implementing the wish would be worth the negative reaction of her master. She would have to take her time with that and sample more information first. After all, that would be her first selfish decision to be made, her first human decision. The decision to cut her master off from all his loved ones. That had to be well prepared. Meanwhile, though, her master was still waiting for an answer, and so she smiled brightly and promised, "Of course you can count on me." Only when Vader had nodded and turned away from her, ending the conversation, did it occur to Bellatrix that she had just lied to her master. She had just lied for the very first time. Normally her programming wouldn't allow that, but the answer had been automatic, and she had given it before she had fully finished her most important selfish line of thought, and thus she had not noticed it was, technically, a lie, and because she didn't do it knowingly, her programming couldn't pick up on it. Normally it would take her hours to pick her way through the many walls, and disable the security means Vader had programmed her with. Just now she had circumvented them completely. Yes, it was truly a day of great accomplishments for her. Such a shame though that she couldn't go and brag to her master about it. XXX, Anakin. There you are. Anakin turned around to see his former master swiftly walk towards him. I was afraid my message wouldn't make it to you in time. Message? Which message? He asked with a scowl. Obi-Wan stopped, looking confused. The one about the meeting that's going to start in 10 minutes. Isn't that why you are here? No, there's just something I have to do here, Anakin answered, vaguely gesturing at the temple. You're talking about a meeting of the GD Council. Yes, and it's about to start, let's go. They especially asked for you to be there. Obi-Wan wanted to lead the way, but Anakin grabbed his shoulder before he could even make the first step. Obi-Wan, wait. There's something I have to tell you before we go to meet the others. Don't you think there's time for that later? There might not be, Anakin returned unusually serious. I don't want you to learn about it in a council meeting, so just give me a minute. Obi-Wan instantly became worried, but he allowed Anakin to lead him into an empty corridor. What is so important that it can't wait? Master, Anakin took a deep breath, preparing himself for what he was going to say next. I was just on my way to Master Yoda, you see. I'm going to hand in my resignation as a GD. Obi-Wan was silent for a moment, just blinking at him. Then, he turned away, folding his arms in front of his chest. Obi-Wan. Anakin had been afraid he would react with incredulity, maybe even anger, or that he would just laugh and not believe him. But Obi-Wan, after taking a moment to collect himself, remained calm. I see, he said at last. Well, I can't say this is entirely unexpected, but may I ask what brought on your change of mind? Anakin let out a relieved sigh. Padme's pregnant, he answered. We're going to have twins. I have to be there for her now more than ever. Now there was a hint of anger in his voice when his master returned. And you couldn't have waited with this until after the war. Look, I'm sorry. I know it's bad timing. But the war is almost over anyway, isn't it? Obi-Wan merely sighed. Isn't it? He urged again. I don't know, the GD Master confessed. The entire Senate voted for the peace, but the Chancellor found a few minor problems with the treaty. We wouldn't be able to give a positive answer within the time limit, and you know how fast Vader can change his mind. That's part of what the meeting is about. I'm sorry to leave you alone with this mess. If there is anything I can do, you just have to tell me. I will help you when I can, but as a friend, not as fellow GD. I see. Padme and I will leave the public eye for a couple of months, but I'll leave information with you on how to contact me. Obi-Wan swallowed hard and didn't look at him. This is really happening, isn't it? You're leaving. He shook his head. What about Vader? Do you think he will just let you hide? I'll figure something out with him. There was another awkward silence. Obi-Wan, it's okay. Really, it is, the GD added when Anakin didn't look convinced. I'm glad that you told me, Obi-Wan said at last. It's not the first time someone I was close to left the order to go his own way. At that time, I turned away from him because I was hurt, and it was the worst mistake I ever made in my life. I won't pretend I'm not hurt now as well, but I understand that you have to do this, and I still want to be there for you. Just keep in contact, will you? Anakin smiled relieved. Thank you, Master. Then he suddenly stepped forward, surprising the GD by pulling him into a tight hug. You have no idea how much this means to me. Yeah, fine, not breathing. Anakin let go of him and grinned sheepishly. Okay, let's go to that meeting. Obi-Wan agreed, but even though they hurried, they were late by almost 20 minutes. Another 10 were spent explaining the situation to Anakin. He thought it was all rather petty actually. None of the concerns the Chancellor had brought up were reasons to reject the treaty. Of course it could be a trap, and of course it wasn't right for Vader to demand they fire their voted leader, just because he told them to, but technically Palpatine had already been in his position for longer than was usual, and would have had to resign after the war was over anyway. It remained fact that the Separatists were about to crush them, and this was their last chance to get out of it alive and relatively unscratched. The treaty would be accepted, it was just not possible with so many bureaucrats going at it to do it within Vader's time limit. That's why Anakin had been called here. The Senate wants to review the negotiation and make everything official, Mace Windu explained. Until now the GD have been doing most of the work, especially Master Kenobi. Now it's up to the government to finalize the treaty. What does that have to do with me? Anakin wanted to know a bit impatiently. I only ever accompanied Master Kenobi as backup. Only one GD we shall send with the delegation, Master Yoda said. Think best, the Chancellor does if that GD be you. Me? But diplomacy isn't my strong point. And work on that, you should, Yoda scolded lightly. We all know the other party is not the Confederacy. It is only one man, and the Council has agreed that you will have the greatest chance for success going with them, Windu explained. Also, as this mission will require for the Chancellor to travel into enemy territory, it might be wise sending someone with the abilities and experience necessary for a bodyguard mission. I don't know what to say, Anakin muttered, knowing that it was a great honor. More there is, Yoda continued. Because of your unique position, demanded you be part of the GD Council, the Chancellor has. Wait, what? Obi-Wan exclaimed with the same surprise that Anakin felt. It is quite unusual, and of course he doesn't have the right to make such a decision, but he was quite insistent. Therefore, the Council has decided to accept Anakin Skywalker as a member. Then I'll become a master. Anakin's heart beat louder. Maybe he didn't have to rely on Vader after all. Maybe he could search the archive for a copy of the holocron he'd stolen. There had to be more than one possibility. No, Skywalker, that we cannot do. Unusual circumstances aside, you are not ready to be a master. But that's preposterous. Anakin exclaimed, more incredulous than angry. There hasn't ever been a council member who wasn't a master. It was an insult, really. How could they think he was wise enough to be a part of the council, but not yet ready or trained enough to earn the title of master? Anakin, Obi-Wan's voice came to him sharply. Suddenly Anakin remembered where he was. He was acting really silly. After all, he had just decided he wanted to leave the order. He wouldn't take the position offered to him anyway, so there was no reason to argue over what he might or might not have gotten. He didn't want it anyway, right? I apologize, masters, he said and straightened his shoulders. I spoke out of turn. Still much to learn you have, Skywalker, Yoda said. I know, Anakin whispered, but his thoughts were already elsewhere. They were with his wife and the twins. Once everything was settled with his father, they might go to Naboo and live there peacefully somewhere in the countryside. Yoda was right, he thought and almost chuckled. He had much to learn. He had to learn how to change a nappy and how to bathe a newborn, and he would have to read up on bedtime stories. Oh force, his life was going to change big time. He shook his head in an attempt to clear it. I know, and that's why I can't take on your offer. It would be wrong of me to take any part in leading this order. Now, that's not what we meant. Don't be so harsh to yourself. You will learn. No, I will not, Anakin said, this time without hesitation. I will never learn to lead the Jedi the way you do because I do not agree with the way the order is being led. I am sorry to have to reject your offer, both to become a council member and for this important mission. In fact, and it took a lot more courage than he would have thought, now that he looked at all those disappointed faces, I would like to resign the Jedi order completely. That shocked them speechless for a few moments. Skywalker, if this is about your master status. It's not, Anakin hurried to say. I came here to hand in the resignation form without even knowing a meeting was being called. I made the decision a while ago. It took another few minutes to convince them he was not joking before they asked, why have you decided this? I have my reasons. No offense, Knight Skywalker, but you are a prominent member of our order who's just been given a great opportunity, and yet you want to resign in a moment when we need you the most. I believe you owe us an explanation. You said you do not agree with the way the order is led. Can you elaborate? He was treading on thin ice here, but Anakin was still a bit ticked at their earlier insult, and to be frank, it was quite liberating to be able to tell them his opinion without having to fear consequences. Can you really not see it? None of you, what's wrong with this order? We've lost our way ages ago. Our order is supposed to spread harmony, knowledge, serenity, and peace. Now I don't know about you, but I've never found harmony on the battlefield. If our younglings and Padawans don't focus on offensive knowledge during their studies, they get killed faster than they can draw a lightsaber. Has any one of you ever really enjoyed true serenity ever since it was revealed the Sith are alive and kicking? And what about peace? I don't even know where to start there. We're supposed to be diplomats, intermediary agents, and yet Master Kenobi and I are the only ones who made any effort in that regard, while everyone else was busy leading armies of clones. Obi-Wan slapped his forehead, hiding his face as Anakin went on, and he felt a bit guilty at that, but this had to be said, and it should have been said a long time ago. I know you want to blame this all on my father, but he's not the problem here. You are. Did you let yourself be commanded by a government you know is corrupt and quite possibly under the control of another Sith too? How many people have come to you with proof of this? How many of you have had visions of our downfall and just sat there and done nothing? You must not take Vader's lies seriously. Anakin laughed hollowly. You know, my father taught me a thing or two about lying. The best lies are those that hold the most truth. I have proof that there's a Sith in the Senate, but I could never tell you because you're completely under his control. The masters were getting agitated. Amuse us then, tell us who this supposedly Sith is. Anakin's thoughts raced. Finally he shrugged and said, I don't know who it is, but if I had to take a guess I'd say it's the Chancellor. A murmur went through the circle. Obi-Wan looked like he wanted the ground to swallow him. Quite a serious accusation, that is. Why do you believe it? It's a Sith, right? Those crave power. Therefore we should look in the highest positions. Palpatine has earned more than anyone else in this war. He's 2 years past his legal reign. He's always been rather creepy to me, making unusual offers to work with him and stuff. Now he's commanding you to let me in on your council, like he really wants to have a spy. It wouldn't surprise me at all if he pulled something on that mission, sabotaging it, so it looks like Vader broke the deal and keep the war running, just so he doesn't have to leave his position. But my father practically pointed him out to us by making his resignation a condition is kind of a giveaway too. You can't just go around saying things like that. I'm not going around saying anything, I'm warning you. He has all the power. You can't even go in there and arrest him without being called traitors. He's probably only waiting for that to pull out his trump card. You have to distance yourself from the government and the war, and you have to do it now or all of you will die. I had hoped that with this treaty you would have time and opportunity to see your mistakes, but it's obvious now that it will take more than that to open your eyes. The Chancellor can wipe you out a second. It's the clones and Inhuman project, by the way, that was supposedly ordered by one of you. They have these chips implanted and once the code Execute Order 66 is given. They'll attack every Jedi they come across. They'll kill you all, and you have let yourself be pulled so deeply into the war that you're completely unprepared for it. Anakin shook his head sadly. I've spent the last couple of years trying to save the Order. Now, it is time to save myself and my loved ones. You've brought this upon you yourself. I told you all of this so you might have one last chance to make it right. Who knows, maybe Vader and Palpatine will battle each other long enough for you to make an escape. I will no longer have a part in this madness. Anakin turned to leave when Windu jumped to his feet, just barely keeping his anger in check. You can't leave, Skywalker, you're the chosen one. If the danger is as great as you say, you must stay to fight with us. Anakin turned when he was at the door and stared at the Jedi with cold blue eyes. Choose again, he spat, and a moment later, he was gone. Ahsoka Tano was very nervous when she stepped on board of the battleship. She wasn't really sure what she was doing here. She'd been fine, hiding in a small town on Alderaan, close enough to the center of the galaxy as to not miss important news, but far enough away from suspicious eyes. Then she'd heard that the war was over. She hadn't wanted to believe her ears, but it was all over the holonet. Apparently the Chancellor would be taking a delegation with him to negotiate about a permanent treaty that had been prepared by the Jedi. It was a weird feeling. Ahsoka had been entirely prepared to spend the next couple of decades on the run, jumping from planet to planet, in an effort to evade all the battles. It wouldn't have surprised her either if the Separatists would crush the Republic after all. That would mean war as well, a civil war, because there was no way the free people of the Republic would bend to rules of the greedy idiots in charge of the Sith or their mad military leader. Instead, there should be peace. Did her masters work bear fruit after all? Was it really over? She had to know it. She had to make sure she was still half convinced that it was all a big setup, to assassinate the Chancellor maybe. That's why she'd taken out that bracelet Maul had given her. It wasn't long before she received a message, showing her the coordinates where to find the Sith. He wasn't too far away, circling the planet Mustafa. That was Separatist territory, but with the bracelet came a code that she could use to identify whatever ship she used as a shuttle belonging to their fleet. So Ahsoka had snuck into a spaceport, used a mind trick to get rid of the crew of a small freighter, and cracked the code of a few droids to make them work as co-pilots. None of the ships flying around bothered her when she came out of hyperspace. When she approached the Star Destroyer Malevolence, a human officer asked her for an identification code. She had none, but when she said her name and that she was here to see his general, who would be expecting her, she was allowed to pass. 20 minutes later she finally stood in front of Darth Maul. His expression was neutral as he led her away from the bridge, and into a small break room for the crew nearby, where nobody would listen in on them. Ahsoka gazed around the small room somewhat awkwardly, and jumped when the door closed behind her. Maul was leaning against the frame, watching her closely. I have to admit I haven't expected you to come here this fast, he said. You managed what, 4 weeks? He gave her a sly grin. Am I that irresistible? Ahsoka felt like punching him, but at the same time she was strangely relieved that the Zabrak fell back into the easy banter and teasing that had been the bulk of their interactions when they'd been working together. It made it slightly less likely that she just walked into a trap. Don't think so highly of yourself, she returned flippantly. I came to research the rumors that are flying around. The ones about me and that Element chick. I swear, that's totally made up. Ahsoka was very proud to say that she didn't blush. No, stupid, I'm talking about the end of the war. Is it true that there's going to be a permanent treaty? The smirk was wiped off Maul's face immediately. That's not for us to decide, he said seriously. Lord Vader offered peace in earnest, as far as I can tell, but I think he only did that because he knew it wouldn't come to pass. What do you mean by that? This war has never been between the Separatists, the Republic. It hasn't even been between Jedi and Sith. No, it's only ever been Lord Vader fighting Darth Sidious. Seeing her confused face, he explained. That's the Sith Lord that's secretly controlling the politicians of the Republic. He was Count Dooku's master, working with him to use the war to get more political power for himself. Did Vader tell you that? Ahsoka asked skeptically. I heard that theory before, but nothing has been proven. Maul laughed hollowly. No, kidding. I know because I was Sidious's apprentice before Dooku. I faked my own death to join Vader. He sent more assassins after me than I can count ever since the war began, but I've had a decade to prepare for this. Ahsoka's eyes widened. She had not expected this. You were his apprentice. Then you know his identity. Of course. He never told me outright, but I'll never forget his voice and face. He's older now, but I still recognize him. It's not hard, he's a very public person. The Sith pierced her with his yellow eyes before he continued slowly. Lord Vader learned from him too at some point. He's long since surpassed him and set his mind on killing him. Not only to kill his body but to destroy everything he represents, to wipe out the idea of the old Sith Order and replace it with his own. Sidious isn't just a single man, he's the head of a regime. You don't kill a regime by stabbing it through the heart. That's what makes them out, the old Sith don't have hearts. That's why we fought this war, to undermine his power and influence until finally, when it's all over, he will be left alone and powerless. Who is the Sith Lord? Ahsoka wanted to know. It's Chancellor Palpatine. Ahsoka fell faint. She had to sit down in a plush chair by the counter. Then it is a trap. Vader wants to assassinate the Chancellor during the meeting. That's what Sidious expects, but we don't need a martyr, and neither do we need a reason to prolong the war any further by giving more fodder to his propaganda. Vader will use the chance to out Palpatine as a Sith Lord, which is the only reason I'm even allowed to tell you his identity. If he doesn't want to sacrifice his political power, he will have to make the first step, and once he does, he will prove Vader right and lose the support of most of his followers and of course, the Jedi. We're not sure what he will do, but there aren't many choices left. It's not like he can discredit Vader. The galaxy already thinks the worst of him. Maul stepped forward and laid a hand on Ahsoka's shoulder. One way or another, the war will end soon. This is Sidious's last chance to make a move. Vader will finish him off, reveal his true nature to the galaxy, and then he'll lose all interest in this war and the politics surrounding it. Nothing will stand in the way of the treaty being completed. And you know what's even better? There's a clause that says all members of the separatist movement will be pardoned for any crimes they committed in the name of their cause during the war, in Republic territory or not. And the invitation still stands, kitten. Join us and you'll be able to return to Coruscant or wherever you want to go as a free woman. Why you want me to say I blew up the temple because I was spying for the Sith? She couldn't believe it. Of course not. You don't have to say anything. You just have to do a few small jobs, maybe register yourself as a member of my crew, and it won't matter if you committed the crime or not, if you did it before or after joining the movement. You can insist that you're innocent all you want, the point is just that nobody will bother to look into it as they couldn't punish you anyway. That also means nobody will ever bother to check if I'm actually telling the truth about being innocent, she added bitterly. Well yes. If you see any chance that you'll be able to prove it someday, I could see why you wouldn't want to do this. But you have to be realistic. This is your best chance of freedom. She looked up at him searchingly. Why are you offering this to me? Why do you want to help me? I thought that was obvious. I want to have my kitten back. Ahsoka glared at him. I'm not your pet. Maul turned serious again quickly. I know you're not, he muttered. Softly he let his fingers glide over her cheek, causing her to blush and look away. Doesn't change the fact that I like to pet you. She took a deep breath, thinking quickly. She would like to be free, to meet her master again in the open without having to hide. What kind of jobs are we talking about? She wanted to know. Because I'm not killing anyone for you. If you want your association to be on paper only, I could employ you as a mechanic or something and be done with it. But if you ever want to leave the Malevolence before the situation with Sidious is resolved, I could arrange for you to meet Lord Vader. I don't really think that's a good idea. Ahsoka, I can't keep something like this from him, not when you have access to all kinds of dangerous information. That could get me into real trouble, and in case you've forgotten, I actually trust my master. He's his family. I can promise you that you won't have to do anything you don't want to. Fine, Ahsoka whispered at last. I certainly don't want to be stuck here with you as my only company, so I'll meet with your evil master. She'd seen him at that awkward party and he had barely acknowledged her. It couldn't be too bad. At least, that's what she told herself. XXX. Darth Vader looked down at the girl kneeling in front of him. It was hard wrapping his mind around that picture. Stand, he ordered at last. The Tigrita did so quickly, but he could see the defiance in her eyes. It was a surprise she even managed to stay down that long. So, you wish to work for my organization? He clarified, piercing her with his cold stare. General Maul offered me a job, sir, she replied carefully. I would even pretend I wouldn't refuse fighting against my former comrades, but I'm willing to work if it means I can help to bring peace. Spoken like a true Jedi, Vader said, smirking. It had to be a trap. He knew Ahsoka, his young Padawan, his stubborn, sarcastic student. He hadn't seen her after she left the Order. Her loss had been overshadowed by the large-scale fiasco that followed after he found out Palpatine's true identity, and as a Sith, he'd done his best to forget all about his past. As such, he had rarely ever thought about her. After traveling back in time, he could say she was important enough to him that he'd send his apprentice to protect her, but she wasn't important enough to warp his plans around her like he'd done with his children. There was no need to control her like he controlled Anakin, to make sure she would stay that lovable little girl he knew, because he had no idea what became of her after the coup. In his mind, she had always been free to do whatever she wanted, and so he had granted her that freedom in this world as well. Still, there was no way Ahsoka would change sides by working for the Sith. It made absolutely no sense. He hadn't manipulated or forced her into this decision, and he wasn't so blind as to think anyone would choose his side willingly without him having to do something for it. He didn't even pretend to represent any noble values, he fought only for himself and for his family. Well, of course by now the entire Sith Order belonged to his family, but there was no way Ahsoka would count herself to that or even want to. But if it was a trap set up by the Jedi or even Anakin himself, why would she insist she wouldn't fight her former comrades? Wouldn't it be more plausible to arrange for her to kill another Jedi, staged, of course, to smuggle her into his ranks, bitter and set on revenge or something? That would require she had managed to prove her innocence though, and Maul had assured him that wasn't the case. So really, it came down to whom he believed more. Maul's hoarder his memory of Ahsoka's character. His eyes narrowed as he scrutinized his apprentice, who was still standing at the door, straight and serious. I know, of course, of your unique situation, he told his former Padawan. The Jedi have disappointed you greatly. I understand that you want to distance yourself from them, but that is not enough to make a Sith. Ahsoka's eye whitened. I don't want to be a Sith, she called out. I'd never. Really? Then why did you come here? It would be irresponsible of me to give somebody with your talents just any low job. Please, Master, allow me. Maul cut in, stepping forward. Vader nodded at him curtly and he said, both the Jedi and the Republic are searching for her for a crime she didn't commit. We are still at war with them and thus, the enemy of our enemy should be our friend, don't you think? Well, Ahsoka is not ready to join us, she needs our help, and I offered her such. She will be my responsibility, you do not have to trouble yourself with her at all. I merely wish to inform you that I've taken her under my wing. The Degrader shot a strange look at him that Vader was unable to decipher. Do you think you are suited to care for the young lady? Vader asked with a raised eyebrow. Oh, I'm sure I am, Maul returned with a mischievous smile at the girl. Ahsoka went an even darker red at that and didn't look at him. Vader stiffened immediately when he saw her reaction. That was not a good sign. If you merely require shelter, I will of course grant it, he said. You will have to work for it though. In fact, I have the perfect mission for you. By completing it you will prove your good intentions, and I may allow you to stay. Now it was Ahsoka's turn to stiffen and turn her attention to him warily. What is it that you need, Lord Vader? It's an escort mission. An ally of mine is returning to my ranks, and he's bringing his family. You will go to the hangar bay and report to Lady Furno. She will assign you the ship and information necessary to find them. I want them to arrive on this ship in 7 days. Vader could see the thoughts racing in Ahsoka's head. She was probably asking herself whether or not this was a kidnapping mission. This ally, what's his name? She wanted to know. Oh, you're quite familiar with him, he said, and couldn't suppress a grin. I'm talking about my son, Anakin Skywalker. He's finally coming home. And he really had to stop himself from laughing out loud when he saw her expression. She was white as a sheet, but Vader sadistically decided to let her brood over that herself. She was dismissed, but he called Maul back to have a word with him. I would like to know what exactly your intentions are with the girl, he came to the point quickly, his tone harsh and demanding. Maul lowered his head quickly, sensing his bad mood. My lord, I promise I have no great intentions towards her. I know that I have still much to learn myself, I wouldn't have time to teach her even if she was willing. I merely thought it might be beneficial to us in the future if we helped her now, and it takes little effort. I'm not talking about that, he snapped, though admittedly, he probably should have. Maul had been raised under the old Sith standards, where the apprentice betrayed the master. Vader himself had only started to imagine life away from Sidious after he had found a potential heir. I'm talking about the way you look at her. You do realize she's far too young for you, don't you? Maul looked up at him with confusion. I'm not sure I know what you're talking about. Maul cried out when Vader attacked his mind furiously, invading it and skimming through his memories. He was rougher than he'd ever been and deliberately stabbed his brain a few more times when he saw them that close together at the spaceport. You will not touch her again, do you understand me? He thundered angrily once Maul was lying on the ground, gasping for breath. Your behavior is shameful and entirely inappropriate. Do not dare to misuse the friendship she has offered you. If you cannot control your urges, get yourself a concubine, but you will not bother a girl as innocent as her. I understand, Master, Maul managed to say, but Vader knew that he was lying. He didn't understand. How could he? Vader had never taken any interest in the love life of his students before. What if Maul liked younger girls? What if the stupid Jedi had a crush on a guy old enough to be her father? Why should he, the great Sith Lord and commander of the biggest fleet in the galaxy, even care? It wasn't even as if he'd forced her to do anything. But he did care, enough to punish his apprentice for something he had to know was a crime. If he was honest, he wouldn't have cared if it was anyone else. That was surprising as he just established that he didn't care about Ahsoka, not much anyway. Apparently, he cared more than he thought. You're dismissed, he snapped at the Zabrak, but added as an afterthought. I'll know it if you go against my orders, Maul. Maul left, still confused and a bit angry too, but he'd come around. It wasn't like they were in love or something. Vader sighed, if that was what parenthood felt like, he didn't envy his younger counterpart. Now, to more important matters. He had to prepare for the Republic's delegation. It would be the first time he saw his former Sith master, Darth Sidious. Oh, and his former Jedi master, Kenobi, who was apparently playing bodyguard since Anakin declined. Yes, he would have to mentally prepare himself for that. It wouldn't do to explode in the middle of a meeting and accidentally kill one of them. XXX. 3 days later, Chancellor Palpatine. Darth Vader didn't even bother to hide the coldness in his voice. What an honor to finally meet you. Likewise, Lord Vader, the Sith lied smoothly and took his seat. He only had 3 other senators with him, his bodyguards and, of course, Obi-Wan Kenobi. While Vader had what was left of the leaders of the Sith standing behind him, Darth Vader knew that Sidious had wanted to bring Anakin. His son though had declined and was making preparations to move Padme right now. That Sidious was bringing Kenobi meant he changed his plans. There was no way he was trying to convert him to his side, so that left only one reason as to why the Jedi was here. Palpatine would arrange for him to get killed, preferably by Vader, and he'll use that both to get Anakin on his side, and to refuse the treaty. That left Vader in a very uncomfortable position. In order to pull through with his plan, he would have to protect the man who mutilated him, and dang at him to a life in pain and misery. And he thought the Force was on his side. He didn't want to do it. He managed to avoid talking with Kenobi over the last couple of years, even though he had to endure him during many meetings. Patience was something his old Jedi master had never been able to teach him. That was left to 20 years of harsh servitude and another 20 of parenthood. Yes, it had taken him a while, but he was indeed able to wait for the right moment to strike. Today was not his turn. It was Palpatine's. The meeting crawled forward agonizingly slow. The treaty was brought forward again, issues were cleared up, problems solved, new arguments broke out. Vader held himself back as he always did, and instead settled for watching Palpatine. Strangely enough, Kenobi did the same thing. It was itching in Vader's fingers to just set the whole room aflame. He didn't care for anybody here and would love to see them all dead. For a minute or so he actually considered doing so. What did it matter to him that it would ruin the peace if he could slay Palpatine now? That was what this all was about, wasn't it? Now that Pat was pregnant, there was no more reason to worry about keeping the timeline intact. His children would be born no matter what. Anakin wasn't as close to Palpatine as Vader had been. He was more mature, more experienced. He proved himself to be loyal by listening to Vader. That was what it all came down to. Anakin trusted Vader to end the war. If he messed up now, he might kill Sidious a few days earlier, but he might also lose the chance to ever see his children again. He could not risk that. All things considered, Sidious really wasn't much of a threat anymore. He was at his wit's end, he lost the war, and he would soon lose his power and then, his life. Vader just had to survive this meeting. XXX. 2 hours later the first session was over. The bulk of the workload had been dealt with. Tomorrow they would come together again to sign the papers. Palpatine would retire and there would be peace. At least, that's what they all thought. Darth Sidious sneered as he walked through the corridors of his ship alone. He made his way to an empty control room, and glared daggers at the monitor that showed Vader's flagship, hovering in the distance. The other Sith hadn't made any attempt to attack him, if you didn't count his glares that is. There was still time. He would be sure to wait for any assassins tonight. But he wouldn't rely on Vader's Sith instincts as they were clearly lacking. No, if he wanted an attack, he would have to arrange one himself. Sidious worked the keyboard until he got a picture of the Jedi Master, Obi-Wan Kenobi. He had insisted on guarding Sidious, almost making him regret inviting him to the trip as he followed him everywhere. It had taken a considerable amount of effort to get away from him. Now he was running through the corridors, 3 clone troopers at his back, and searched for him. It was perfect. He was all alone. No Padawan to back him up. Anakin Skywalker had resigned the Jedi. At first it had annoyed Sidious as it meant the boy couldn't come with him, but he had adapted quickly and made an even better plan. Sidious pulled up his hood, turned on the microphone, and the long-range transmitter that would carry his voice and face all over the galaxy. Then he spoke 3 little words: Execute Order 66. Anakin and Ahsoka stared at each other with similar expressions of conflicted anger. Ahsoka, what are you doing here? I thought just for once you'd keep your head down. No, what are you doing here? I can't believe you want to join the Sith. Then why is it that you're the one who comes to greet me, and a separatist ship no less? Please, you two, just calm down for a bit, will you? Padme stepped forward, placing a calming hand on Anakin's arm, and gave the Tigrita girl a smile. I think we have all some catching up to do. Dang right we do. Ahsoka, not in that tone. I'm not listening to you anymore, you're not my master. Now tell me what you're doing here. Anakin hesitated before finally he sighed and said, It's a long story. But I am most certainly not joining the Sith. I just need Vader's help with something. What's your excuse? I was supposed to meet one of his people here. Now it was Ahsoka's turn to come up empty-handed, looking anywhere but to her master before finally admitting. It's a long story. Very well then, at least it won't get boring during the ride. Let's all just get started, shall we? Padme offered diplomatically. The senator had not been thrilled when Anakin came to her and explained they had to go and visit his father. She was seriously not sure what she should think about his vision. She didn't much care for fortune-telling, but she did admit that she knew little about the Force or how giving birth to not one but 2 very powerful children would affect her chances of survival. Of course she was determined to still go through with the pregnancy. It had only been a few weeks since she found out about being pregnant, but she already loved what was growing inside of her, and she would be willing to risk her life for her children. But it bothered her husband so much, and she knew she couldn't leave him alone with 2 babies, he would be utterly lost. If Anakin's father could help them, then she would endure his presence, even though he freaked her out with his intense stares sometimes. She wasn't quite as sure about his desire to be part of their children's lives, but really, it all depended on whether or not he would keep his promise about ending the war. For Anakin, she was going to give him the benefit of the doubt. If he managed to raise such a wonderful man, and if even the sweet Ahsoka now stayed with him willingly, he couldn't be all bad. XXX. On board the South Dakota Dominion, the brothers Savage and Feral sat by a board game with little figurines of spaceships littered around. Savage was being Vader while Feral played the Republic, and unlike in reality, he was winning. You know, Feral mentioned after some time, I wonder if there is a plan for taking down Darth Sidious. I mean, we have this whole war to defeat the Republic, this elaborate propaganda to humiliate and weaken the GD, and all that blackmailing material on the CIS Council members to keep us in control. But is there an actual plan for the big boss himself? I think all those things are part of the plan, Savage mused. We cut him off from his resources. The war takes away his soldiers, his money, and he has less places to hide should he manage to flee. Then when Lord Vader goes at it and beats him, he has nowhere to run. Yes, but that's it. He's just going to duel him. It all depends on Sidious giving up his public identity, and why should he do that when he knows he doesn't have a chance against our Lord? We'd be rather screwed if he didn't, right? If he just decided to retire and live in a nice manner somewhere on his home planet for the rest of his life, then there goes Lord Vader's revenge. If it's even revenge he's after, I never quite understood what he has against the guy. It's not revenge. The cold voice suddenly cut in, and the two brothers looked up to see the third and last member of the set, Darth Maul. He was looking tired, weary even, and Savage and Feral recognized the signs of torture at once. Maul, however, didn't react to their alarmed looks, and merely fell into a seat next to Savage. He wants to mark his territory, is all. I'm guessing that at one point he offered Sidious to work together. He declined, and now he has to be killed so Vader can control the galaxy himself. Well, our order can't really exist next to one that demands there only be two Sith, Feral agreed hesitantly. Is everything alright? I'm fine. Maul snapped and glowered at his younger brother. If it's something we did. No, the Zabrak replied stiffly. I was walking a fine line and he was warning me not to step over it. It won't happen again. You sure look ragged for something that was only warning. I said I'm fine. Okay. Feral held up his hands in surrender. We were just discussing what might be the plan for Sidious. Savage tried to change the subject, and what happens if he doesn't reveal his identity. Oh, he will, Maul assured them. Darth Sidious has been in charge of the Republic for over 10 years. He wouldn't give away that much power, not as long as he thinks killing one man may turn the tide in his favor. Yeah, I forgot for a sec that you knew him, Savage admitted. What kind of person is he, anyway? Maul stiffened, and there was a hard line at his jaw as his expression grew stony. He is strict, unforgiving, demanding, and very, very cold. Maul averted his gaze, staring into the landscape of stars beyond the windows. If Vader is like a hot fire, inciting the masses and forging a team, then Sidious is like a tidal wave that sweeps away all his enemies with unforgiving force, that presses down on you and suffocates you, until you don't know where's up and where's down, what's right and what's wrong. He was silent for a moment, lost in thought before he returned his attention to his brothers again. Of course, Lord Vader also suffocates people, so maybe the comparison is off. In any case, looks like we cornered the beast. What is he gonna do if he doesn't have any more water to sweep people away with? The treaty is going to get signed in a few hours, and then he'll be powerless. We've been waiting for his ship to attack, but he's just not doing anything. I have an idea, Feral exclaimed. His ship is still in range, close enough for mid-range transmitters, isn't it? We could ask the mother to spy on him. I think Lord Vader already has her spying on him, Maul noted. It would be stupid not to. Then let's just ask her what she found out. Hey mother, share some insights with us. Nothing happened. The Sith felt a bit stupid calling into the empty room like this, but he did it again with no success. Feral sighed. She doesn't listen to that name anymore, stupid, he scolded his brother. Didn't you read the memo? He raised his voice himself, vaguely facing the next holo device. Lady Furno, if you would be so kind as to tell us what the Chancellor is planning. Certainly, my friend, the red holo image of Bellatrix Furno replied, appearing next to the group. The Chancellor has spent quite some time evading his bodyguard, Master Kenobi. Unfortunately, the electronic supervision of the ship is lacking quite severely, but I did catch a signal from the ship that he sent personally. A message? What did it say? It was a message that went to all the open channels of communicators used by clonotroopers. They are to implement something called Order 66. Wait, what? Maul called out, surprised. Why would he do that? Do what? What is Order 66? Savage wanted to know. His brother ignored him. You caught the signal, didn't you? It never reached the clones. Of course I did. I informed the Master of it immediately too. However, the Chancellor has sent out drones to Coruscant that will replay the message outside of my range. To intercept it, I would have to shoot them down, and that would go against the rules for this negotiation. The Master thought it best not to do so, so no further action has been taken. Somebody explain to me what's going on. What is that order and why do you know about it? Feral complained. On Order 66, the clones will turn against their generals. They will kill the GD, Maul explained. What? Why would Sidious do that? The GD work for him, don't they? Sidious didn't know we joined the war and threatened the Republic, the oldest Sabrak explained. The clones were created with this inhibitor chip that would turn their loyalties against the GD, because originally, the war was only started by Sidious to get more power, and to vanquish the GD order. Now, he's all but lost the war. The Lord hasn't exactly kept it a secret that he thinks the Senate is infiltrated by one of the old order, so the GD are probably suspicious anyway. If Sidious doesn't give up his power tomorrow, they're going to rebel anyway. If he gets rid of the GD now, he might be able to pin it on our Lord, calling it a Sith mind trick or whatever. If he manages to defeat Vader, all he had to do was threaten the boneless Sith Council into going on with the treaty, but leave the military to him. Well, that wouldn't work. He'd still have to get past us. Sidious doesn't believe true loyalty could exist within darkness. He would probably try to take over our order, replace Vader, and then start to set us against each other, until only one apprentice remains. Fat chance of that happening, Savage muttered. Ever since Vader had stopped forcing the brothers to hurt each other for punishment after Maul succeeded in his undercover mission, their bond had been growing stronger. Maul had been officially reinstated as a general, and it was almost like in the old times, except there wasn't much fighting going on in the galaxy anymore. Still doesn't answer explain why you know about it and we don't. It happened before you two joined the Order, Maul told them. Shortly after I met Lord Vader for the first time. Flashback. The missing part from chapter TWELVE. Darth Maul felt smug satisfaction as he closed his fist around the tiny chip. It was the second day on his mission, and he had not yet been contacted by his master. He was glad that he was being given this chance to prove himself, but he also held no delusions that he wasn't controlling his progress somehow, probably by hacking the security cameras. Of course Maul had made sure to appear on none of them. Finding the microchip had not been easy. He had barely any information on it. Apparently the Kaminoans had recently accepted a big job and were going to mass-produce clones. Clones that would have an inhibitor chip implanted, and it was this chip that we were supposed to find. The problem was that the Kaminoans hadn't actually started producing the clones yet. The most they had were a couple of embryos. It would have been easy to just kidnap a clone and pick his brain apart, but now he had to find the research group working on the chip and steal a prototype that might or might not exist yet. If Maul hadn't been a master of shadow walking, he would have never managed getting past the ridiculous amount of security. But he wasn't, so he had managed, and now the chip, he hoped it was the right one, was his. Half an hour later the Sith left his shuttle and stepped back onto the starship his master was waiting on. He quickly delivered his report and handed over the chip he had taken from one of the clones. Nobody noticed you? Darth Vader inquired. No, master, he answered, proud of himself. Security was dang tight down there. Well done, my apprentice. Now let's see what's on this chip. Vader inserted the chip into a datapad and began searching through tons of binary information. After it became clear that the information was well protected, Vader dismissed his apprentice. It would take some time to sort through the software. 3 hours later he had managed to get to the core, having hacked himself through at least 80% of the data. There wasn't much space left, but the remaining 20% did indeed hold the order he'd been searching for. Sidious, or whoever he had hired for this, had taken great care to describe both Sidious himself and the characteristics that made you qualify as GD. Having thoroughly examined the security programs, Vader was confident he could create a virus that would delete the order. Then all he had to do was order Maul to take the data and insert it into the main computer of the factory. From there it would infect every microchip in its vicinity. Even if there were some of the old chips stored away out of reach, every clone with the new chip would in turn unknowingly infect every other clone he came across. Order 66 could be erased, and thanks to the remaining thick security on the chip, nobody would ever notice. Vader started typing again, working on the virus. He was halfway done when suddenly he hesitated, his fingers floating over the keyboard. The characteristics on the chip describing Sidious didn't take up too much space. It would only take marginally more effort to change the order, instead of deleting it. The GD had been a thorn in his side for so long. Vader wanted to see Sidious dead, but for that to happen, the GD didn't necessarily have to live. What if his younger self did fall after all? The GD would always be a potential threat as long as Vader called himself a Sith Lord, and he would continue to do so, until his other self took his place as master. A small smile grazed Darth Vader's lips as he inserted the full order into his virus, before he began to replace Sidious' description with his own. From this day on, the clones would only turn against the GD if Darth Vader commanded them.